Chapter 46. Mo Chenga was both excited and depressed about this trip to Miwu Valley. She was excited because if she could persist until the end, she would be rewarded handsomely and wouldn't have to worry about medicinal pills for a long time. She was depressed because she would have to spend the spirit stones she earned in the last 2 to 3 months. She bought some talismans, asked Murong Yen to get some seeds, and prepared some temporary formations. She had almost used up all the spirit stones she had. During this time, the 5 people in the same room became closer than ever. They kept each other informed about what they were going to do and what they were going to do. They planned to win in one fell swoop in this trip to Miwu Valley. Mo Chenga was naturally happy to see some of them working together, but she wouldn't put all her hopes on her companions. She spent all the spirit stones she had. Even if she couldn't persist until the end, she still had to get some rewards in order to not suffer a loss. A month passed in the blink of an eye. All the aura refining disciples in the 7th layer and above gathered in the square again. This time, aside from the sect head, there were also 2 core formation cultivators in the square. Yunwu sect only had 1 nascent soul cultivator and 7 or 8 core formation cultivators. This time, the sect head and 2 core formation cultivators showed up together. Disciples, don't talk nonsense. Today is the day of the competition between the 3 cultivation groups in Miwu Valley. I presume you already know about this matter, so I won't repeat it. However, there's one thing I want to tell you. To encourage the disciples, the sect has decided that the 3 disciples who win the most victories will be rewarded with an additional 500 spirit stones and a bottle of aura-converging pills. The sect head's words caused an uproar in the square. 500 spirit stones. Ordinary aura-refining disciples only earned 5 spirit stones a month, and ordinary errands only earned about 10 spirit stones a month. Mo Chenga had been busy for several months and almost didn't have time to cultivate, but she only earned about 100 spirit stones. Ordinary aura-converging pills cost 2 spirit stones each, while aura-converging pills cost 25 spirit stones each. 500 spirit stones were completely enough to cover the rewards for persisting until the end, not to mention the additional bottle of aura-converging pills. Mo Chenga was very excited. 500 spirit stones and a bottle of aura-converging pills. If she could persist until the end and obtain those 2 bottles of aura-converging pills, she could completely focus on closed-door meditation until the peak stage of the aura-refining realm. Just as she was lost in her thoughts, she suddenly heard someone coughing. Mo Chenga immediately calmed down. Only the top 3 would receive this reward. She herself was only in the 8th layer of the aura-refining realm. Not to mention, there was more than one foundation-building cultivator like Senior Marshal Brother Zhou. Besides, there were at least 100 disciples whose cultivation levels were higher than hers. Her chances of getting into the top 3 were indeed very slim. At this moment, the sect leader and the other 2 core formation cultivators exchanged a few words. The 3 of them spread out and took out their magic treasures. It was a giant tortoise, a boat, and a square handkerchief that was spread out over an acre of land. The sect leader shouted, "Disciples in charge, bring your disciples here." Senior Marshal Brother Zhou gathered the 20 or so disciples together and said, "Junior Marshal Brothers, we're going to Miwu Valley now. We've said everything we need to say, so let's do our best." After he finished speaking, he led everyone forward and lined up to board the small boat in the middle. When the several hundred disciples all boarded the 3 flying magic weapons, the core formation grandmasters controlled their respective magic weapons. In an instant, the 3 magic weapons soared into the sky and flew forward at an extremely fast speed. The aura-refining disciples on the magic weapons were all amazed. Flying magic weapons. Aura-refining disciples could only use the light body technique. Only those who reached the foundation-building realm could use spirit tools or magic weapons to fly. However, only core formation magic weapons could carry so many people at such a fast speed. She didn't know whether any of the people on the flying magic weapons today would be able to advance into the core formation realm. It should be known that in a medium cultivation group like Yunwu sect, only 1 core formation cultivator would appear every 100 years. Maybe none of them would be able to advance into the core formation realm. Mo Chenga kept her lament to herself. Among these disciples there was no lack of talented people, but even they weren't sure they could advance to the core formation realm, let alone her. The speed of these flying magic weapons was extremely fast. The sect head steered the tortoise spiritual beast to fly in the front while the others followed closely behind. About 4 to 6 hours later, their speed finally slowed down and they slowly descended. Mo Chenga lowered her head and looked down. There was a mountain with a flat top next to a misty canyon. There were already a lot of people parked on the mountain. They were cultivators wearing yellow clothes and purple clothes. Apparently they were the disciples of Jindao School and Wuxia sect. When all of them landed, the sect head and the other two core formation grandmasters put away their magic weapons and walked towards the center of the mountain where several core formation cultivators were already waiting. After they greeted each other, the sect head said, "Brother Jean and Brother Li are so impatient. They arrived so early." Those two people were presumably the sect heads of Jindao School and Wuxia sect. The one called Brother Jean was relatively young. He seemed to be in his early 30s, but it was unclear whether he had taken look-preserving pills or similar medicinal pills. The other person was much older than sect head Fong. His hair and beard were already grizzled. Apparently his lifespan wasn't very long. The younger person let out a humph, and said in a rather unhappy manner, "Brother Fong, you're just too confident. My Jindao School's strength isn't good enough, so we came early to prepare." Mo Chinga had heard that Jindao School had internal strife 100 years ago. Currently their strength hadn't recovered yet. Presumably, this school head Jean was dissatisfied with the competition in Miwu Valley. After all, if their disciples weren't good enough, they would have to share the profits. The old man surnamed Li, on the other hand, had his eyes half closed and was calm and composed. He said, "Brother Fong, long time no see." Apparently this person was the sect head of Wuxia sect. This competition was proposed by Wuxia sect. It was said that Wuxia sect was the opposite of Jindao School. In the past 100 years they had accepted many good disciples. Seeing that they were even stronger than Jindao School and Yunwu sect, they couldn't help but want a share of the profits. Mo Chinga wanted to continue watching, but Louis Dao patted her shoulder and said, "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, let's get together." Mo Chinga turned her head and uttered a yes. The disciples of the three groups were all on this mountain. Some were meditating and some were whispering to each other. The five of them found a place with fewer people and sat down in a circle. Louis Dao said cautiously, "Junior Marshal brothers, I have to emphasize something first. The five of us are traveling together and cooperating with each other. We have to share our hearts with each other. We can't just say what we mean and ruin other people's futures." The others all nodded. This was the basic requirement of cooperation. Otherwise, if they couldn't trust each other, how could they travel together? Louis Dao continued to emphasize, "Hang your identity tablets properly. Putting them in your chinkuan bag is useless." The others checked their identity tablets and confirmed there were no problems. Louis Dao continued to say, "Let's make this clear first. We'll cooperate to defeat the enemy and we'll divide the identity tablets equally. If there isn't enough, we'll divide them according to the role they played in the fight. We mustn't argue about this. If we have any objections, we'll discuss it properly. What do you guys think?" Su Jingji agreed. "Of course. Now that we're in Miwu Valley, we're companions. If we argue, other people will take advantage of us." Mo Chinga also nodded. The other two also didn't object. Seeing this, Louis Dao happily said, "That's all I wanted to say. Do any of you have any questions?" For this trip to Miwu Valley, everyone tacitly agreed that Louis Dao would be the leader. They all expressed that they would let him make the decisions. Right after they finished speaking, several sect heads gathered in one place and said in unison, "Disciples, gather. The competition is about to begin." Chapter 47. With the three sect heads working together, a transporting formation suddenly appeared in midair above the mountaintop. This was Mo Chinga's first time seeing a transporting formation. Although she studied formations, the scale of a transporting formation wasn't inferior to that of a great mountain protecting formation. Her current attainments in formations were far from enough. The circular transporting formation in front of her was covered with profound cloud patterns and spirit stones. The whole formation shone brightly and emitted a mysterious aura. She stared fixedly at the transporting formation, trying to comprehend its meaning. All formations were interpreted according to the yin and yang of the world, the 5 elements and the 8 trigrams, but she couldn't understand the meaning of these complicated 8 trigrams patterns. Mo Chinga sighed. It wasn't that her attainments in formations weren't high enough, but there were some things she couldn't understand in her current realm. Perhaps she could only understand them after advancing to the foundation building realm or even the core formation realm or nascent soul realm. Once the formation appeared, the disciples scrambled to be the first to be transported. If the elders of the sect weren't here, there might have been some conflicts. A moment later it was finally their turn. With a flash of white light, the 5 of them disappeared into the transporting formation. Mo Chinga opened her eyes and couldn't help but feel astonished. What was this place? At that moment, the others also opened their eyes to observe their surroundings. They all frowned. The place they were in was surrounded by rock walls and a long and narrow passage. It seemed to be a cave. Where is this? Su Jingji asked while looking around. We won't be transported to a spiritual beast's cave, right? As soon as he said that, everyone else's expressions changed. Yes, this place indeed looked like a cave. Maybe it was the habitat of a spiritual beast. If that was the case, they really hit the jackpot. They didn't need to encounter the disciples of the other two cultivation groups. This spiritual beast would give them a good beating. Louis Dao calmed down first and said, Junior Marshal Brother Su is right. We'd better be careful. The five of them observed for a while, then chose a direction, summoned their spirit tools or protective spells, and cautiously moved forward. However, they didn't know what kind of spiritual beast's cave it was. There were many forks in the road. The five of them walked back and forth, bypassing several dead ends, but they couldn't find the exit and didn't encounter any spiritual beasts. They gradually lost their way. This cave was simply like a maze. No matter where they went, their surroundings didn't change at all. Even the rock walls had the same pattern. After walking for nearly an hour, everyone finally lost their patience. Su Jingji took the lead and said, We can't get out of here like this. Even Jiang Shanghong had an impatient expression on his face. Mo Qingge also felt a hint of irritation in her heart. This scenery was indeed unchanging, which made her feel annoyed. After pondering for a long time, Louis Dao said, How about we split up and look for the way? The few of them hesitated. If they split up, what would they do if they encountered spirit beast? Let's split up then. Mo Qingge finally made up her mind and said, We don't know whether this is a spiritual beast's cave or not. Maybe it's just an underground karst cave? If we keep going around like this, who knows when we'll end up? Why don't we split up and explore the way? Yes, Su Jingji said, I agree with Junior Marshal Brother Yi. Even if we really encounter some danger, we can just treat it as us coming here to broaden our horizons. We won't lose anything. Seeing that no one objected, Louis Dao said, That being the case, should we split into 2 or 3 groups? It might be safer if we split into 2 groups, but it'll be faster if we split into 3 groups. Qin Shi said, Since we've decided to split up, let's split into 3 groups. Alright, if we split into 3 groups, I'll take 1 group. Junior Marshal Brother Jiang and Junior Marshal Brother Qin, the 2 of you will take 1 group each. Louis Dao arranged the groups this way because among the 5 of them, he, Jiang Shanghong, and Qin Shi were in the 10th layer of the aura refining realm, while Su Jingji and Mo Qingge were in the 8th layer of the aura refining realm. This way they wouldn't be defeated too quickly if they encountered danger. It could be said that Louis Dao would suffer the most if he went alone, so the others didn't have any objections. Thank you, Senior Marshal Brother Lu. Qin Shi thanked him, then turned towards Mo Qingge and Su Jingji. Junior Marshal Brothers, who will go with me? Mo Qingge and Su Jingji glanced at each other. Su Jingji then said, Junior Marshal Brother Yi, you go with Senior Marshal Brother Qin. I'll go with Senior Marshal Brother Jiang. He then winked at her. Mo Qingge understood what he meant. She saved Jiang Shanghong last time, but he didn't appreciate it at all. Su Jingji knew she hated Jiang Shanghong, so he told her to go with Qin Shi. Mo Qingge also knew Su Jingji's relationship with Jiang Shanghong was a bit better than hers, so she didn't refuse and nodded. Okay. The 5 of them split into groups and set off in different directions. The road was still like a maze with unchanging rock walls. Mo Qingge walked with Qin Shi for a while. There were several dead ends, but she still marked them according to the method she used just now. However, it still didn't work. This went on for another half an hour. Mo Qingge started to feel a bit impatient. She became more and more certain that this wasn't a spiritual beast's cave. It might be a maze set up by the seniors of the 3 cultivation groups. Spiritual beasts simply didn't have the ability to create a maze like this, so they couldn't even tell which direction was inside. At this moment, Qin Shi suddenly turned around and glanced at her. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, guard your mind. Mo Qingge was startled. She realized she was about to be controlled by her impatience. She was shocked and hastily guarded her dantian with aura. Only then did her mind become clear. She couldn't help but feel a lingering fear. Thank you for reminding me, Senior Marshal Brother. It seemed this maze wasn't that simple. When one was inside, one's mind would unconsciously become unstable. This way, when one encountered danger, it would be very easy to make mistakes. What in the world is this? Qin Shi carefully looked at the surrounding rock walls and asked, Junior Marshal Brother Yi, do you know the Tao of formations? Mo Qingge nodded. I know a thing or two. Then don't you think this looks like a formation? Mo Qingge had long felt this way, so she immediately said, Yes, everywhere here is exactly the same. It seems like there's no end to it. It's very much like a maze. However, if this is a formation, the cultivation level of the person who said it must be above the foundation building realm. From what I know, it'll be very difficult to break it. Qin wasn't disappointed. He said, I've indeed heard that Miwu Valley used to be a place for closed-door meditation before the competition took place. Maybe this is a formation left behind by those seniors. This was Mo Chinga's first time hearing this. She asked curiously, Senior Martial Brother Qin, where did you hear this? Qin, she said, a martial uncle in the North Peak told me about it. I only heard him mention it. However, because the spirit veins here were getting worse and the fog was getting thicker, people gradually stopped coming here. Later, the 3 cultivation groups found this valley again in order to find a place for the competition. In that case, when they chose the place for the competition, they should have carefully examined it. Why did they still leave this formation here? Maybe it's because it's too hidden, or maybe they thought this formation could be used as part of the competition. This was indeed possible. Mo Chinga didn't say anything more. She continued to carefully examine it with Qin step by step. Even if it was a formation laid by a high-level cultivator, there must be a formation eye. As long as they found it, they could easily get out. Chapter 48. Mo Chinga paused and carefully looked at the rock wall for a long time. She also touched the surface of the rock wall. Qin stopped beside her. What's wrong? Mo Chinga carefully observed for a while, then said, There's something wrong here. Upon hearing that, Qin walked closer and saw that the rock wall was still covered with irregular natural patterns. Upon seeing his doubtful gaze, Mo Chinga pointed at the patterns and said, Do you remember what the other patterns look like? Qin shook his head. I'm not proficient in formations, so I can't tell. Mo Chinga said, It seems meaningless, but in fact there's a vague layer of magic on it. It's actually the position of the 8 trigrams. 8 trigrams? Qin frowned. You're saying the problem is on this rock wall? Mo Chinga nodded. Yes. If I'm not mistaken, this is the 8 gates life and death formation of the Chiman Duanjia. 8 gates life and death formation. Qin frown deepened. He muttered to himself and suddenly said, Then, can we leave this formation if we find the life gate and the opening gate? In theory that's right, Mo Chinga said, but in reality it's not so absolute. Because in high-level formations, the 8 gates can even change and are difficult to grasp. I've only seen some clues about this formation now, so it's obviously not simple. I'm not sure whether we can find the life gate or not. No matter what, we have to try. Mo Chinga nodded. Yes, failure is better than being trapped here. It can't be considered a victory if we don't get a single identity tablet. After carefully examining it, she said, This is the Zhen position. It seems to be the pain gate, which has the wood attribute. I practice a wood attribute cultivation technique. Let me try. Qin stood in front of the rock wall. Mo Chinga stood in front of the rock wall, took out her greenwood sword, poured spiritual aura into it, and suddenly controlled it to rush towards the rock wall. The moment the sword collided with the rock wall, a layer of light appeared on the rock wall, blocking the attack of the greenwood sword. Seeing this, Mo Chinga mobilized all the spiritual aura in her body and rushed forward without backing down. The layer of light was finally pierced by the sword and disappeared without a trace. The moment the greenwood sword touched the rock wall suddenly exploded. Suddenly the scenery changed and they were standing in front of another rock wall. It was as if everything that had just happened was an illusion, and the rock wall was undamaged. A smile appeared on Mo Chinga's face. The gate of pain has been broken. This is the Li position, the Li Palace's gate of view, a position of fire. She wrinkled her brows in embarrassment. I'm not proficient in fire spells, I can only cast a few fireballs. What about you, Senior Brother Qin? Qin, she said, I mainly cultivate metal and fire elements, so I'll do it. Mo Chinga felt relieved and took a step back. She watched as Qin took out a sword from his Chenkuan bag and unsheathed it. Upon seeing this sword, Mo Chinga couldn't help but feel somewhat astonished. This sword's entire body was golden, and within the flames, its aura was astonishing. Compared to her greenwood sword, it was unknown how many times more imposing it was. It was actually a magical treasure. It wasn't that she hadn't seen magic treasures before. The spirit-concealing jade pendant Yi Jingwen gave her to conceal her constitution was precisely a magic treasure. More than half a year ago when she killed that man from Clan, the enchanting lantern she obtained was also a magic treasure. However, aside from concealing one's aura and purifying spiritual aura, That spirit-concealing jade pendant didn't have any other effects. That enchanting lantern was an illusion-inducing magic treasure. It looked ordinary and unremarkable, unlike the sword in front of her, which had a threatening aura. Qin Shi moved his spiritual aura and swung his sword in a very ordinary manner. However, with a rumbling sound, the defensive spell on the rock wall was destroyed without any resistance. The rock wall exploded and the two of them returned to the scene they were in before. Qin Shi sheathed the sword, then glanced at her. It wasn't easy for me to obtain this sword. If other people found out about it, I wouldn't have a day of peace. I hope Junior Marshal Brother Yi can help me conceal this and not tell other people. Mo Chenga was very clear about what a flying sword magic weapon represented. If she took out the enchanting lantern in her hand, countless cultivators would covet it, let alone this sword. It was no wonder that Qin Shi never took out this sword in front of other people. An ordinary man was innocent, but treasuring a jade ring was a crime. If other people found out about this, how could a small aura-refining cultivator keep such a magic weapon? Mo Chenga nodded in understanding. Rest assured, Senior Marshal Brother Qin. We can only escape if we work together. Once we leave this place, I'll just pretend I didn't see anything today. Qin Shi showed a faint smile, but this smile made Mo Chenga dumbfounded. She had known him for a long time, but she had never seen him smile. He was originally handsome, but when he smiled, he looked even more graceful and handsome, making people unable to look away. It wasn't until she saw his questioning expression that Mo Chenga hastily withdrew her gaze, feeling annoyed in her heart. Really? It's not like I've never seen a man before. I've disguised myself as a man and mingled with men for a long time, but I'm actually staring at a man in a daze. To cover up her gaffe, she hastily looked at the pattern on the rock wall. DUI shock gate metal element. Qin Shi stepped forward. I'll do it. It was still the same sword, but it was covered with a layer of golden aura. Qin Shi stimulated the spiritual aura on it, and a moment later the shock gate was broken. This time Mo Chenga was overjoyed. Because the rock wall in front of them was different, the surrounding rock walls moved one after another. In a flash, the passage between the rock walls turned into a stone room. The two of them cast defensive spells and cautiously walked in. This stone room was very high and very spacious. There was only a shelf in the corner with a few things on it. Mo Chenga looked around the shelf, but she couldn't see any traces of formations or restrictions. Finally, she picked up a book made of animal skin. Chimen Duanjia. She opened it. Sure enough, it was a book describing formations. Qin Shi, who was holding the other book, let out a cry of surprise. Mo Chenga looked at him. What's wrong? Qin Shi waved the book at her and said, This golden body art is a high-level body refining art from our school. I've inquired about it. This art is placed in the most secret room of 10,000 Laws Pavilion. It's said that only grandmasters in the core formation realm or above can read it. Mo Chenga remembered that he also cultivated body refining art. It seemed he was indeed very interested in this book. Qin Shi flipped through the book and said to her, Junior Marshal Brother Yi, this book is very useful to me. This book belongs to me and the rest belongs to you. What do you think? This body refining art wasn't very useful to Mo Chenga. On the contrary, the formation book in her hand was no less useful to her than Qin Shi's body refining art. She originally thought that even if all these things belonged to Qin Shi, she would still exchange this book. Now that Qin Shi was willing to give up other things, she naturally wouldn't disagree. In addition to these two books, there were several other books, jade slips and 2 jade bottles. Among them there was a pill concocting book and the others were cultivation notes. The medicinal pills in the jade bottles weren't any good, they were just spirit cleansing pills. Some medicinal pills would leave behind pill poison after being eaten, and these spirit cleansing pills were used to remove pill poison, so they weren't valuable. Mo Chenga swept all the things into her Chenkuan bag without any guilt. What is this place? Why does it seem like it was deliberately set up to reward us? Qin Shi said, it might really be left behind by the elders of the school. These things aren't important to them, so it seems they were meant to reward the disciples who broke the formations. As they spoke, sounds came from outside the stone room. It seemed like someone was coming this way. Mo Chenga and Qin Shi glanced at each other. They each took out their spirit tools, cast defensive spells, and stared at the door of the stone room. At that moment, the sound of the door became clear. Several cultivators dressed in yellow clothes broke in. Chapter 49. They were Jindao School's disciples. There were 5 of them in total. 2 in the 10th layer, 1 in the 9th layer and 2 in the 8th layer. Mo Chenga frowned. With the special effect of Greenwood art, she could protect herself against 2 or 3 cultivators with similar cultivation levels, but if there were more than 3, she didn't know how many Qin she could handle. At that moment, Qin Shi put away his sword and said in a low voice, "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, leave the 2 10th layer aura refining cultivators to me. You try to trap the others." Emo Chenga nodded. Whether it was Greenwood art or formations she was good at, they were good at trapping, not killing. If she had to fight the other 3, she really wouldn't have any confidence, but it would be much easier to trap them temporarily. Qin Shi went to meet them. Sure enough, when the other party saw that his cultivation level was also in the 10th layer, the 2 10th layer cultivators both rushed forward and controlled their spirit tools to attack him. Since the Immortals Assembly, Mo Tienga hadn't seen Qin Shi fight. However, he was very proficient in the use of spells and practiced body refining techniques, so he was suitable for fights of magical power. Presumably, he was stronger than ordinary 10th layer aura refining cultivators. She didn't have time to deal with Qin Shi because 2 of the other 3 people rushed towards her. Mo Tienga took a step back and used her footwork to dodge the 2 people's attacks. She then took out her greenwood sword and hovered in the air to restrain them while sprinkling seeds in her hand. The 2 people didn't know what the seeds in her hand were, so they chose to dodge. But in the next moment, they discovered that when the seeds fell near their feet, they immediately grew thorns. These thorns glowed red, and as soon as they touched them, they immediately felt a burning pain. Taking advantage of the fact that they couldn't react, Mo Tienga threw out another handful of seeds. The fire thorns once again grew, forming a simple spirit-trapping formation that surrounded them. The seeds that flew after her suddenly turned into a huge white flower the moment they touched them. The flower's petals bloomed, releasing a tempting fragrance. The 2 people suddenly felt dizzy and couldn't summon their spiritual aura. Mo Tienga heaved a sigh of relief. She took back her greenwood sword and stared at the only person left. That person originally thought that 2 cultivators in the same realm as her would be enough to deal with a mere 8th layer aura refining cultivator. He didn't expect that he would be trapped by her in an instant, so he immediately controlled his spirit tool to attack her. This person had sharp eyes. Once he saw Mo Tienga's technique, he immediately used light body technique to fight her in the air. His figure changed in the air, so he couldn't set up a temporary formation or use the thorns to trap him. He only had to face her bewitching flowers and the greenwood sword. This was also Mo Tienga's shortcoming in fights of magical powers. By the time she advanced to the foundation building realm, fights of magical powers between cultivators would take place in the air. Thorns and the like would no longer be of any use, and greenwood art could only stimulate plants that grew for a short period of time. Those things basically had no effect on foundation-building cultivators. The person in front of her was flying in the air using the light body technique, which made her Verdantwood incantation useless. For a moment, the situation was deadlocked. Mo Tienga took a look at the spirit-trapping formation and wrinkled her brows. The spirit-trapping formation she laid on the spot could only trap people for a while. It would be terrible if it dragged on. Thinking of this, he took out a talisman from his bosom, intending to end the battle as soon as possible. Unexpectedly, at this moment, the person opposite him let out a cry of surprise and anger. Mo Tienga turned around and saw Qin Shi reaching out his hand to catch something. There was only one opponent left. She was overjoyed. Taking advantage of the moment her opponent's mind was shaken, she threw the talisman without hesitation. Amidst the flames created by the talisman, the identity tablet on the person's waist emitted a soft white light. In the white light, the person's body disappeared. The identity tablet dimmed and fell to the ground. Mo Tienga reached out to catch the identity tablet, then turned around to face the 10th layer cultivator together with Qin Shi. His companions were sent out one after another, so this person was already flustered. Before long he was also sent out. Qin Shi took the identity tablet. The remaining 2 8th layer cultivators trapped in the spirit-trapping formation had just escaped from the formation when they were immediately disrupted by a series of spells. They were defeated without much resistance. The 2 people disappeared and the 2 identity tablets fell to the ground. Mo Tienga heaved a sigh of relief. She didn't have much fighting experience. This time she was fighting 2 against 5, so she really didn't have the confidence to win. Her mind had been tense the whole time. As soon as the fight ended, she felt weak in the legs. Looking at the 2 identity tablets, Mo Tienga hesitated. This time, although Qin Shi was fighting 2 and she was fighting 3, in fact Qin Shi dealt with one of them first, which gave her an opportunity to take advantage of. Therefore these identity tablets couldn't be taken for granted. She also felt unwilling to give up one. Qin Shi smiled. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, These two people were trapped by you, so the identity tablets belong to you. Mo Chenga couldn't help but feel that she was a bit narrow-minded since he was giving them away. However, she also couldn't learn to refuse, so she immediately took the identity tablets and said earnestly, "Thank you, Senior Marshal Brother Qin. I will engrave this friendship in my heart." Qin she waved his hand and said no more. At this time, footsteps came from outside the room. Mo Chenga and Qin she glanced at each other, feeling depressed. Why did another group come after they killed one group? The next moment, the person who entered the room startled them. It was Louis Dao. "Senior Marshal Brother Liu." Louis Dao was surprised to see them. "Turns out you were ahead of me. Where are Junior Marshal Brother Jiang and Junior Marshal Brother Su? Have you seen them?" Mo Chenga shook her head. "No, Senior Marshal Brother Liu, what's the situation outside?" Louis Dao said, "I've been looking for you since I realized the formation was broken, but I didn't see you for a long time until I came here. The other two Senior Marshal brothers aren't outside?" "I haven't seen them." Mo Chenga frowned. "It seems their situation isn't good. The formation was broken so they could easily find this place. However, those two people actually hadn't arrived yet." The two of them stared at her in confusion. Mo Chenga took out a summoning jade talisman from her Chengkuan bag and inserted her spiritual aura into it, wanting to send it to Su Jingji. However, the jade talisman didn't respond at all. She sighed and put away the jade talisman. "They're not here. They might have been defeated and sent out." Qin she immediately thought of something. Was it the 5 people just now? It should be. They were also sent here. The 2 Senior Marshal brothers must have run into them outside and were defeated by them. Louis Dao was confused. "What happened?" Mo Chenga said, "When we arrived here just now, 5 Jindao school disciples came in after us." Louis Dao was surprised. "Where are they now?" "We defeated them and they were sent out." It took Louis Dao a moment to react. He sighed and said, "I underestimated the 2 Junior Marshal brothers. 2 against 5, but they actually won." Mo Chenga smiled. "They weren't familiar with the characteristics of my spells, so they were caught off guard." Senior Marshal Brother Qin, on the other hand, didn't fall into a disadvantageous position at all and even defeated one of them first. "Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to do anything." Qin she just shook his head and changed the topic. "Since Senior Marshal Brother Liu is here, let's discuss our next step. We've been here for half a day, so we don't know the situation outside." Louis Dao said, "Should we go out?" Mo Chenga hesitated. "Isn't it too dangerous to go out now?" Louis Dao said, "Junior Marshal Brother Yi doesn't know, but it'll be more dangerous if we hide here for a while. This time there are a lot of Wuxia sect disciples and Miwu Valley isn't that big. When they clear out all the people outside and come back to search for us, it'll be very difficult for us to hide. At that time if we're found we'll have no way to escape." What he said was very reasonable. The other 2 people pondered for a moment, then Qin she said, "Then let's go out. Since we can't hide, we'll talk after we defeat a few more people." The 2 of them didn't have any objections. Louis Dao guarded them while they adjusted their breaths and recovered the spiritual aura they consumed in the fight just now. Once their spiritual aura and energy were restored, the 3 of them packed up their things and left the formation. Chapter 50. Now that the formation was broken, the 3 of them walked out and discovered that it was only a very shallow cave. If they really hid inside and didn't come out, they would have been discovered long ago, and they wouldn't be able to escape even if they grew wings. Miwu Valley was indeed worthy of its name. As soon as they came out of the cave, even with their eyesight as cultivators, they could only see things within a few dozen feet. The vast white fog hid everything in front of them. They could only hear shouts and fighting noises coming from the white fog from time to time. Seeing this situation, Mo Chenga took out her greenwood sword and prepared to fight at any time. Louis Dao frowned. We can only try our luck?" Mo Chenga said, "The fog is so thick so it might not be a bad thing for us. If we only have 3 people, I'm afraid we'll be cleared out very soon. In this situation if we have fewer people we'll fight. If we have more people we'll hide and take the opportunity to launch a sneak attack." "Correct." Qin she nodded. "It'll be easier if we have fewer people in the fog." Having made up their minds, the 3 of them wandered around. Sure enough, from time to time they came across fights of magical power. If they met other Yunwu sect disciples they would lend a hand. If they met Jindao school or Zixia sect disciples, they would fight if they had fewer people. If they had more people they would hide in the fog and use talismans to communicate, then they would scatter and meet up again. If they ran into a fight between 2 other groups, they would sit on top of the mountain and watch the tigers fight. At a critical moment they would attack and fish in troubled waters. In the boundless white fog, 7 or 8 Jindao school disciples met 10 or so Wuxia sect disciples. As soon as they saw each other, they started fighting. Although Jindao school disciples had fewer people, their cultivation levels were relatively high. Both sides fought back and forth with equal strength. Just when they were both injured and the winner was about to be decided, all of a sudden, densely packed fire thorns grew all around them and surrounded them. Then big bewitching flowers floated in along with all kinds of magic talismans. Very soon they who were already injured and exhausted of their spiritual qi, were cleared out by these magic talismans one by one, and their tokens fell to the ground. The fire thorns retreated and 3 Yunwu sect cultivators appeared. The leader, a tall and strong man, collected all the identity tablets on the ground. The 3 of them then left without stopping, disappearing into the fog. At the end of the first day when night fell, Mo Tienga and the other 2 returned to the location of the formation. Mo Tienga set up another bewildering formation. The 3 of them hid inside and rested while dividing the loot. Throughout the day they didn't kill many people head-on, but they did steal quite a lot from the muddy waters. After counting, there were actually more than 100 command tokens. Louis Dao was both startled and delighted. We've really made a profit this time. There are more than 100 identity tablets here. If we divide them, each of us will get about 40 identity tablets. Each identity tablet is worth 10 spirit stones, so each of us will get several hundred spirit stones as a reward. Mo Chinga calculated in her mind. Yunwu sect had a total of 300 to 400 aura refining disciples who were in the 7th layer or above. Jindao school had slightly fewer disciples, but Wuxia sect definitely had more than 500 disciples. In other words, Yunwu sect probably had about 800 identity tablets from other sections. Of course, in fact, Wuxia sect was a bit stronger. Assuming Yunwu sect had a 50-50 chance of winning against them, including Jindao school, the number of identity tablets they could snatch would only amount to about 400. Moreover, more than half of Jindao school's identity tablets would be snatched by Wuxia sect, so the total number of identity tablets they could snatch would be about 300. Right now they had more than 100 identity tablets in their hands. Even if they divided them into 3 portions, it wouldn't be a problem for them to rank among the top 10 sections. Qin Shi, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground, was adjusting his breath. Upon hearing Louis Dao's words, he said faintly without even opening his eyes, "Today there were the most chaotic battles. The weaker ones were all eliminated. I'm afraid we won't have such an advantage tomorrow. We better not take chances." Mo Chinga and Louis Dao became a bit more clear-headed after being splashed with cold water. Louis Dao looked ashamed. He immediately asked, "Junior Martial brothers, how should we divide these identity tablets?" Qin Shi opened his eyes. He pondered for a moment then said, "It's all thanks to Junior Martial brother Ye's special spell that we were able to conveniently take advantage of the situation. Let's give him a bit more." Mo Chinga was dumbfounded. "This? How can I accept this?" Even so, it was Louis Dao who took the risk to scout out the enemy situation. In addition, Qin Shi's exquisite spell made those people think they had a lot of people, so they didn't have the heart to resist. Louis Dao was also open-minded. He admitted that although his cultivation technique was solid, he didn't have any special skills and wasn't as scheming as them, so he didn't argue too much. He said with a smile, "That being the case, Junior Martial brother Yi will each get 50 identity tablets, and Junior Martial brother Qin and I will each get 41. What do you think?" Qin Shi nodded. He didn't have any objections. Since they agreed on this, Mo Chenga no longer refused. She couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Although the path to immortality was difficult and cultivators couldn't be considered too noble, not everyone was unscrupulous and only had benefits in their eyes. For example, the people she met, Louis Dao was straightforward, Su Jingji was concerned, and Qin Shi, although cold, was also attentive. She was always on guard against others because of the lessons she learned in her childhood, but now, with Yi Xiaoyan's identity, she believed they were trustworthy. After putting the 53 identity tablets into her Qingkuan bag, she also sat down to adjust her breath. Qin Shi had finished adjusting his breath, so he stood guard. In fact, it wouldn't have mattered even if no one stood guard. Mo Chinga was confident in formations. This maze was the result of her and second uncle's painstaking efforts. Once an aura-refining disciple entered the formation, it wouldn't be a problem for them to be trapped for several hours. However, this was Miwu Valley after all, so it was better to be careful. All of a sudden, a sound came from inside the formation. It seemed like someone had entered the formation. Mo Chenga opened her eyes and looked at them. Each of them took out their spirit tools or talismans. The footsteps were heavy, staggering, and messy. Apparently there wasn't just one person. Senior Marshal Sister Shin, how are you? It was a woman's voice. It was crisp, hoarse, and full of anxiety. Mo Chenga frowned slightly. This voice was somewhat familiar. After a while, she heard the voice again. I'm fine. I can still hold on. Junior Marshal Sister Wang, how about your injuries? I'm fine, but my spiritual aura is almost exhausted. The two of them were silent for a while before they heard Junior Marshal Sister Wang say, I don't know what this place is. There's unexpectedly no fog, so I don't know if it's safe or not. Senior Marshal Sister Shin said, it might be the location of an immortal's cave left behind by our predecessors. It's just that we don't know if we found it or not. We'd better look around. Mo Chenga drew her sword. Now that she had determined their position, she slowly entered the formation. Once she reached that position, she cautiously turned around a corner. All of a sudden, she was met with a spell and several pieces of wood were thrown at her. She dodged to the side and was about to brandish her greenwood sword when she heard that person's surprised voice. Junior Marshal Brother Yi? Is that Junior Marshal Brother Yi? Mo Chenga was stunned. The two disheveled women in front of her seemed familiar when she looked at them carefully. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, I'm Wang Qianni. Mo Chenga was gobsmacked. Senior Marshal Sister Wang. Wasn't this the Senior Marshal Sister Wang she met every day when she was collecting heavenly dew? She looked at the other woman. Although her hair was messy, it still couldn't hide her beauty. She looked very familiar. Mo Chenga hesitated, but she vaguely recognized her. This is Senior Marshal Sister Shinbing? Chapter 51. A group of 5 people settled down in the stone room. Qin Shi went outside to keep watch while Louis Dao found a corner to regulate his breath. Mo Chenga stared thoughtfully at the entrance of the cave. In a place like Miwu Valley, people had to worry about sneak attacks from time to time. This Senior Marshal Brother Qin really made things convenient for others. She turned around and saw that the 2 senior sisters had already packed up, so she walked over. Senior sisters, how are you? As soon as Wang Qian saw her coming over, she made way for her seat. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, please sit. Mo Chenga didn't stand on ceremony and sat across from them. At this moment, Shinbing opened her eyes, and her aura had already calmed down a lot. This time I have to thank Junior Marshal Brother Yi. If we hadn't coincidentally met you, I'm afraid that Junior Marshal Sister Wang and I would have been found and kicked out by them tonight. Mo Chenga smiled and waved her hand. Senior Marshal Sister, you don't have to be so polite. We're from the same sect, so we should help each other after entering Miwu Valley. Besides, one more person means one more strength. She paused for a moment, then asked, so you 2 senior sisters are familiar with each other? What a coincidence. Wang Qianni smiled and said, there aren't many female disciples in our sect, so we know most of them. Besides, Senior Apprentice Sister Shin isn't an ordinary disciple. How many people in the sect don't know her? Oh, that was true. Among the more than 1,000 aura-refining disciples in the school, only about 30% of them were female, and most of them came from cultivation clans. Women in the secular world rarely embarked on the path of cultivation. Like her, she was fated to become an immortal because of her ancestors. However, when she saw Shinbing, she thought of someone. Senior Sister Shin, isn't Senior Sister Murong with you? Hearing this, Shinbing revealed a bitter smile and said, they were originally in the same place, but you also know that the girl is usually very lazy, and her magic is sloppy, so she has already been kicked out. This result wasn't strange to Mo Chenga. Although Senior Marshal Sister Murong's cultivation level wasn't bad, it was all because she ate medicinal pills. She didn't have much ability in fights of magical powers. She usually either ate or played, so it would be strange if she could hold on. Wang Qianni sneered, if she hadn't met those people, Junior Marshal Sister Murong might have been able to hold on. Humph, that group of scum, I'll deal with them one day. Her tone of gnashing her teeth made it seem like she had a life and death grudge. Shinbing's expression also became serious. Junior Marshal Sister Wang, don't say these words out loud. Just keep it in your heart. One day when we reach the foundation establishment stage, those people won't be a problem. Right now we don't need to worry about them. Mo Chenga was bewildered. Senior Marshal Sister, what kind of person are you talking about? Wang Qianni answered, he's the scum of Zixia sect. When they saw that we were all women, they took liberties with us. Because Junior Marshal Sister Murong was too impulsive, she didn't notice and was kicked out. In the end, only the two of us were left. Senior sister, don't worry. I will remember this grudge and sooner or later, I will deal with them. The last sentence was said to Shenbing. Seeing that she was so reasonable, Shenbing nodded in relief and continued to meditate to heal her injuries. Mo Chenga then asked Wang Qianyi about the general situation. As it turned out, their cultivation levels weren't bad at all. Shenbing and Wang Qianyi were both in the 10th layer, Murongyan was in the 8th layer, and there were 2 other female disciples in the 9th layer. However, because they were female disciples, their strength in fights of magical power was a bit weaker. Although Mo Chenga was also a woman, to be honest, in the cultivation world, female cultivators were not only few in number, but their cultivation levels were also a bit lower. Even if their cultivation levels were the same, they generally weren't as good at fights of magical power as male cultivators. There were many reasons for this situation. Among them, it was the influence of the secular world where men were superior to women, as well as the nature of women themselves. The difference between men and women wasn't only in terms of appearance, but also in terms of temperament and habits. Women were more emotional, sentimental, and more likely to indulge in worldly emotions than male disciples. Men, on the other hand, were naturally more aggressive. Compared to female cultivators, they were more willing to spend a lot of time on spells, so it was natural for them to have a higher cultivation level. It wasn't long after such a small group of female cultivators entered Miwu Valley, they were discovered by a Wuxia sect disciple, and the two groups ran into each other. That Wuxia sect disciple saw that most of them were good-looking, so he took liberties with them with dirty words. With Murong Yan's temperament, how could she endure it? She impulsively wanted to make a move, but the other party was deliberately provoking them so they could find an opportunity to defeat them one by one. Just like that, Murong Yan was kicked out. Soon after, the 2 9th-layer aura-refining female disciples also couldn't resist. Only Shenbing and Wang Qianyi, who had good escaping techniques, managed to escape to this place and run into them. Mo Chenga also said with a stern expression, "Senior Marshal Sister Wang, although you already understand, Junior Marshal Brother will say it again. I hope you won't take offense. Today's situation was chaotic, so we were able to smoothly escape with our lives. Tomorrow, I hope Senior Marshal Sisters can restrain themselves. Our strength isn't good enough, and we don't have as many people as Wuxia sect. If we can't control ourselves, we'll bring misfortune to others." They didn't have many interactions with female disciples, so they wanted Mo Chenga to tell them that if they wanted to stay with them, they mustn't implicate everyone. Shenbing and Wang Qianyi's cultivation levels were relatively high, so they understood this reasoning. Although Mo Chenga's words didn't make them feel comfortable, they were also reasonable, so they both nodded and didn't express any different opinions. Mo Chenga didn't say anything more and said, "Senior Marshal Sisters, rest assured and rest. My disorienting formation won't have any problems blocking people. Besides, Senior Marshal Brother Qin will be guarding outside. You two should rest well and recover your strength as soon as possible." After exiting the formation, she saw Qin sitting on the ground on the edge of the cave. His expression was indifferent. The sword with an astonishing momentum rested on his knees. He sensed her presence, but he didn't put it away. Mo Chenga walked towards him, picked a place at random, brushed her sleeves and sat on the ground like him. "Senior Marshal Brother, what are you thinking about?" After a long time, Qin finally put the sword into his Chengkuan bag and said, "Nothing." Mo Chenga tilted her head and looked at him with a thoughtful expression. "I heard Senior Marshal Brother Qin was originally a member of a cultivation clan. How did you end up like us and become an individual cultivator?" Qin suddenly glanced at her. His gaze was piercing, but after a while he shifted his gaze. His tone was still flat. "Junior Marshal Brother, you should be very clear about this. Many small cultivation clans can't survive. With only a few cultivators left, they have no choice but to become individual cultivators. I think Junior Marshal Brother Yi has a deeper understanding of the rise and fall of clans than I do." Mo Chenga paused. She knew her probing was too obvious, so his words were a bit prickly. She couldn't help but feel embarrassed, so she smiled and said, "Senior Marshal Brother Qin is usually a man of few words, so I'm very curious." Qin raised the corners of his mouth as if he was smiling. He said, "I'm also very curious about Junior Marshal Brother Yi. We usually talk and laugh together, but in fact, we don't seem to have much contact." The smile on Mo Chenga's face froze. Did he mean? Qin changed the meaning of his words. "We've always gotten along well, so I think Junior Marshal Brother Yi is just curious. However, I think it's fine to guess some things in private. There's no need to know everything clearly." Mo Chenga didn't say anything. How could she not understand his obvious meaning? What he meant was that everyone had their own secrets, so there was no need to expose them. Originally she was just curious, so she probed him a bit. She didn't expect this senior martial brother Qin to be so open about it. Thinking of her own secret, her expression changed slightly. She calmly observed Qin Shi for a while. She only relaxed a little when she felt Qin Shi wasn't keeping a distance from her or deliberately getting close to her. It seemed her disguise was quite successful in this aspect. Even though Qin Shi felt she had a secret, he couldn't figure out what it was. She tacitly agreed with his proposal and changed the topic. Senior martial brother Qin, what do you think about the matter with the two senior martial sisters? Qin Shi said, since I don't oppose them staying, it naturally doesn't matter. Senior martial brother Qin, aren't you afraid of being implicated? Qin Shi shook his head and smiled. Junior martial brother, do you want to fight for that reward? Of course. If they persisted until the end, they would get 2 bottles of aura converging pills and 100 spirit stones. If the number of identity tokens they won reached the top 3 in the school, they would get 500 spirit stones and a bottle of aura converging pills. If the reward for each identity token was included, they would get several hundred spirit stones. Altogether, they would get more than 1,000 spirit stones, enough for her to enter closed-door meditation until the school's minor competition. Qin Shi said, Junior martial brother Yi, aren't you afraid of attracting too much attention if the reward is too high? Mo Chenga was stunned. I have a suggestion. We have a lot of identity tokens in our hands, enough to get a lot of spirit stones. In addition to the reward for the top 3 in the school, we don't have to persist until the end tomorrow or the day after. It's best if we can be kicked out. That way, even if we get the top 3, we won't attract too much attention. Mo Chenga was stunned. Qin Shi looked at her with a faint smile. Could it be that junior martial brother Yi hopes to show off your strength so that you can be accepted as a disciple by one of the school's elders and become an elite disciple? His words were obviously meant to provoke her. Mo Chenga's expression turned cold. I don't hope to become an elite disciple, but I also can't do anything that would drag my fellow disciples down. Qin Shi was stunned, but he soon laughed loudly. His laughter was carefree like she'd never seen before. Once he finished laughing, Qin Shi looked at her and said in a much gentler voice, Junior martial brother Yi, please don't misunderstand. To be honest, although those 2 junior martial sisters only suffered minor injuries, they're of no help to our group. I don't think they thought they'd be able to persist until the end. As for senior martial brother Lu, I'll use the identity token in my hand to compensate him. Mo Chenga was shocked. What's this senior martial brother Qin's purpose? He's actually willing to give up the spirit stones in his hands just to not attract attention. Chapter 52. Early the next morning, the 5 of them left the stone room. Wang Qianyi and Shenbing were only lightly injured, which was why they could stay in Miwu Valley. After resting for a night, they were no longer in danger. After some discussion, the 5 of them agreed to travel together. If they got separated, they would use talismans to communicate. In addition, Qin Shi coldly told the 2 of them that if they got kicked out due to their lack of strength, they shouldn't complain to them. His words and actions were very different from last night. Mo Chenga felt that he had an ulterior motive. She didn't know where he came from, so it would be better for her to avoid contact with him in the future. Otherwise, it wouldn't be good if she was implicated if something went wrong. Wang Qianyi and Shenbing could only smile bitterly and nod. They were experienced aura-refining disciples in the sect, so they knew what was good for them. Qin Shi's willingness to travel together with them was already good enough. Besides, Mo Chenga already told them last night that since they were going to travel with them, they should listen to their commands. Since they were mentally prepared, Qin Shi's words weren't that harsh anymore. Today was indeed different from yesterday. They walked around the valley for a while but didn't encounter anyone else. Presumably, most of the people were already kicked out yesterday. Lu Yidao continued to inquire about the situation. He had an unconventional cultivation technique that was good at hiding one's breath and strengthening one's divine sense, so he was the best candidate. Today they rarely encountered a small group of people. If it wasn't a group of 7 or 8 to more than 10 people, it would be 1 or 2 people who were alone. Presumably, after yesterday's events, it was either because they were strong or because they had gathered a lot of people that they could stay until now. They killed most of the people who were alone. Some of them were said to be famous and powerful aura-refining disciples. Wang Qianyi and Shenbing recognized them, so they thought about it and decided not to act. In any case, they had enough identity tablets in their hands, so there was no need to take risks. The opportunity to fish in troubled waters was gone because there weren't many people left. Most of them were gathered in one place, so it was very difficult to act. At noon they rested for a while. Louis Dao came back from scouting and told them that there were two groups fighting not far away from them. They belonged to Yunwu sect and Wuxia sect respectively. Yunwu sect only had one person while Wuxia sect had 6 people. After a while the 5 of them decided to go and investigate. Since this person could fight 6 people on his own, his strength must be outstanding. If the 5 of them went, they might be able to turn defeat into victory. After flying for a short while, he heard the sounds of fighting. Weapons clashed and spells collided. It was quite intense. Amidst the flying dust, they approached the scene of the fight. From a distance, they could see the sorry figure of that Yunwu sect disciple. Senior Brother Zhou. Louis Dao was shocked when he saw that person's face. This person was actually their managing disciple, Senior Martial Brother Zhou. Mo Chenga swept her gaze over the area opposite Senior Martial Brother Zhou. Louis Dao said there were 6 people when he came back from scouting, but there were only 5 left in front of her. Could it be that Senior Martial Brother Zhou killed one of them? Those who could manage disciples were all elites among aura refining disciples. It was no wonder that this Senior Martial Brother Zhou could persevere for so long under the hands of 6 aura refining disciples. Among these Wuxia sect disciples, 3 of them were in the 8th layer. They were really daring. Elite disciples could easily deal with several ordinary disciples, but Senior Martial Brother Zhou was in the 11th layer of the aura refining realm. Obviously he wasn't an ordinary disciple. However, these people's efforts were not in vain. With so many people taking turns, Senior Brother Zhou's spiritual chi was obviously running out. As long as they persisted, they could still win. The 5 people who came with them each took out their spirit tools. Qin Shi's spell had already been cast, forcing those Wuxia sect disciples to retreat several steps. Upon seeing them, Qin Shi was startled. It was obvious that they were also struggling and didn't notice that someone was approaching. Senior Martial Brother Zhou was overjoyed and shouted, "Junior Martial brothers and sisters, they can't hold on any longer. Quickly attack." Mo Chenga and the others didn't hesitate and used their spirit tools and talismans to attack. Their cultivation levels were obviously much higher than their opponents, so it didn't take them long to completely wipe out these Wuxia sect disciples. Senior Martial Brother Zhou. After escaping from the bitter battle, Senior Martial Brother Zhou wiped the sweat on his forehead and looked at them. Junior Martial brothers? He recognized the disciples who lived with him, but he wasn't close to them and wasn't familiar with them, so he couldn't call out their names. His gaze shifted to Shenbing and Wang Qinyi and he was surprised. Junior Martial Sister Shen, Junior Martial Sister Wang, how come you're also here? Shenbing smiled bitterly and said, Senior Martial Brother Zhou, we're all from the same sect. We were kicked out so we got together. She then asked him, Senior Martial Brother Zhou, aren't you with Senior Martial Brother Li and Senior Martial Brother Qi? How come? This time it was Senior Martial Brother Zhou's turn to smile bitterly and said, to tell you the truth, we underestimated our enemies too much. Last night when we were resting we were ambushed. 2 of us went out and the other 2 got separated. Later on we couldn't find them. Since Senior Martial Brother Zhou was an elite disciple, naturally those who were with him were not ordinary disciples. They were all outstanding. No wonder he said that they underestimated their enemies. Mo Chenga couldn't help but lament her good luck. A group like Senior Martial Brother Zhou's actually met such a fate so early. If it wasn't because she happened to be with Qin Shi and Louis Dao, she'd probably be outside now. It was precisely because Louis Dao's divine sense was powerful, Qin Shi's magic was outstanding, and they were exceptionally careful that they were able to avoid powerful enemies and obtain so many identity tablets. After that, the group fell into silence. Apart from Mo Chenga, all 5 of them were in the 10th layer of the aura refining realm, so their strength wasn't weak. Senior Martial Brother Zhou naturally wanted to be with them, but he was just a disciple in charge, so he was too embarrassed to say it out loud. Wang and Shen, who joined later, wanted to say something, but they didn't know whether they were willing or not, so they could only look at them tentatively. As for Mo Chenga, she was actually worried about Senior Martial Brother Zhou. It wouldn't be good for them to deliberately lose. After talking with Qin Shi yesterday, she already agreed to his proposal. Indeed, she couldn't attract attention. If she persisted until the end with her cultivation level in the 8th layer, she would definitely attract other people's attention. There were 3 core formation cultivators outside Miwu Valley, and it was said that the sect head would personally reward them. Even if she had the spirit concealing jade pendant to conceal herself, she still didn't want to take this risk. Besides, even if she didn't obtain the final reward, she still had about 50 identity tablets in her hands, which could be exchanged for more than 500 spirit stones. She was also willing to make up for it so she could obtain the top 3 rewards. That way she would still have 500 spirit stones and a bottle of aura converging pills. Based on this calculation, she could obtain more than 1,000 spirit stones and a bottle of aura converging pills. Coupled with the bottle of aura converging pills in her hands, it would be enough for her to enter closed-door meditation until she reached the peak stage of the aura refining realm. After waiting for Senior Marshal Brother Zhou to recover his spiritual aura under their protection, she said, "Senior Marshal Brother Zhou, since we're fated to meet, we might as well go together. I wonder if it's convenient for Senior Marshal Brother Zhou?" Zhou Wang and Shen were obviously relieved. Senior Marshal Brother Zhou readily agreed. "Thank you, Junior Marshal brothers and sisters. I'd be happy to go with you." She smiled. "In that case, what do you think we should do now, Senior Marshal Brother Zhou?" Senior Marshal Brother Zhou said modestly, "I'm basking in your light. You must have already cooperated with me, so I'll cooperate with you." She nodded, then said to Lui Dao, "Senior Marshal Brother Liu, in any case, it'll be very difficult for us to run into other people today. It'd be better for us to just wait here. We'll be able to wait at ease while we're exhausted. It'll be a bit more relaxing." Lui Dao nodded without any objections. Since yesterday he was already very accustomed to Qin coming up with ideas. Ever since Qin entered Miwu Valley, he was practically like a fish in water. It seemed like his experience in fights of magical powers was much richer than theirs. Thinking up to this point, Mo Tiange once again pondered this person's origins. Chapter 53. Someone's coming. Lui Dao, who was meditating, suddenly opened his eyes. Mo Tiange immediately stood up and held her greenwood sword in her hand. Senior Marshal Brother Zhou stared at her and said, "There are about 10 people. 10 people? It seemed difficult to deal with them." Senior Marshal Brother Zhou once said that after wandering in Miwu Valley for a day, he rarely saw any disciples of Wuxia sect. Jingdao school had already been cleared out long ago, and Wuxia sect had the most disciples. Wuxia sect's disciples were most likely the ones who came. In the fog, those people finally appeared in front of them. Wang Qinyi cried out in alarm with an angry expression on her face. "Junior Marshal Sister Wang, what's wrong?" Wang Qinyi said angrily, "The people who spoke rudely to us are among them." Since they were together, they had already talked about their experiences. Senior Marshal Brother Zhou frowned. At this moment, those people were already in front of them. 5 were in the 10th layer of the aura refining realm, 3 were in the 9th layer, and 2 were in the 8th layer. It seemed the 7th layer aura refining disciples had been cleared out long ago. Most of the remaining people were in the 10th layer. Mo Tiange pondered in her heart. The other side had 10 people while we had 6. Although we were at a disadvantage in numbers, Senior Marshal Brother Zhou was in the 11th layer of the aura refining realm. Even if he was slightly injured, his strength couldn't be underestimated. Their odds of winning were still quite high. "Oh." A rascally-looking young man stared at Wang Qinyi and Xin Bing and said with a smile, "Ladies, it turns out you're here. We've been looking for you for a long time. Why are you in such a hurry? Could it be that you're not satisfied with us?" Wang Qinyi's face was completely red, and Xin Bing's eyebrows were already furrowed. Both of them were frowning and didn't say a word. Senior Marshal Brother Zhou looked at them and coldly stared at the person in front of him. "Junior Marshal Brother from Wuxia sect, please conduct yourself with dignity." That person glanced at them and was about to ridicule them when he realized that Senior Marshal Brother Zhou was in the 11th layer of the aura refining realm. He immediately swallowed his words, but he also didn't want to admit defeat, so he said with a smile, "Senior Marshal Brother, I was just joking. You don't have to be so serious, right?" Mo Tiange snorted and said, "I wonder if these Senior Marshal brothers usually joke like this with their fellow martial sisters? That's really unusual. Our Yunwu sect's martial brothers always treat our fellow martial sisters with great respect and would never casually joke with them." These words caused the young man's face to stiffen, instantly turning the color of a pig's liver. Someone in the team immediately snorted and said, "Why are you talking to them? Let's end this as soon as possible. We can still rest for a while today." Only then did the young man's expression soften. With a snort, he summoned his spirit tool. The next day, everyone was already tired of greeting each other. Almost as soon as they saw each other, they would fight. This time, the young man spoke a few words of nonsense, and the two sides were already fighting without saying a word. Senior Marshal Brother Zhou was surrounded by 3 people. while the remaining few charged towards Shin Bing and Wang Qianni. Both of them were lightly injured, and each of them had to fight 1 against 2, which put them in a dangerous situation. Senior Marshal Brother Zhou was entangled by those 3 people. Seeing that the 2 of them were struggling, he shouted, "Junior Marshal sisters, come over here. Junior Marshal brothers, go help them if you can." Upon hearing this, Lu Yidao forced his opponent to retreat a few steps before approaching Wang and Shen. While retreating, Qin Shi said to Mo Chenga, "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, entangle them." Mo Chenga nodded and threw the remaining fire brambles at them. The seeds filled the sky and pierced the ground, causing thorns to grow and entangle the 3 opponents. Bewitching flowers were also thrown at them, finally trapping those people and rendering them powerless to fight back. Seeing this scene, Senior Marshal Brother Zhou looked at her in surprise. Among so many people, she was the only one in the 8th layer of the aura refining realm. Senior Marshal Brother Zhou thought she was just lucky, but he didn't expect her to also be extraordinary. If an aura refining cultivator didn't prepare in advance, it would be very difficult to avoid this trapping technique. It was no wonder she could hold on until now. Mo Chenga cautiously walked between the 3 people. She wasn't Senior Marshal Brother Zhou, who had to rely on trapping techniques to fight 1 against 3. She could only hope that they could quickly deal with the others so they could free up their hands to help. Seeing this situation, one of the people in the team with a higher cultivation level shouted loudly, "Fly up." This reminder made her opponent struggle to fly up using the light body technique. Mo Chenga's expression changed. Sure enough, her opponent wasn't simple. He could think of a way to break this technique so quickly. The seeds in her hands were almost used up, so she could only clench her teeth and persevere. All of a sudden, Qin Shi's low voice entered her ears. "Don't persist. Take this opportunity to perish together with them." Mo Chenga was startled, but she suddenly understood. Taking this opportunity to escape was the best. Not only was it honorable, but it also wouldn't implicate Senior Marshal Brother Lu. In a split second, she made a decision. She took out several spirit stones from her robe and with a flick of her sleeve, she laid them down without anyone noticing. Under the joint attack of the 3 people, her complexion turned pale and she kept retreating. Seeing this, the other party was overjoyed and the 3 of them attacked her together. Just when Mo Chenga couldn't hold on any longer, Qin Shi shouted, "Junior Marshal Brother Yi." Right at that moment, the scenery around her suddenly changed. Mo Chenga drew her sword and pointed it downwards. Suddenly, sand and stones flew everywhere. In the dense fog, several rays of light burst out at the same time. Lu Yidao didn't have enough time to save her. He could only watch helplessly as they disappeared into the flying sand and several identity tablets fell to the ground. The scenery in front of her changed. Mo Chenga looked around and found herself at the top of a mountain. Qin Shi and several others were standing beside her. The top of the mountain was densely packed with disciples from the 3 cultivation groups. Their appearance caused a commotion. The 3 Zixia sect disciples fiercely glared at them, then walked towards the place where Zixia sect disciples were gathered. "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, Senior Marshal Brother Qin," someone called out in front of her. Mo Chenga turned around and saw that it was Su Jingji. He hastily pulled the 2 of them away, found a corner and sat down. He then asked with concern, "How are you guys?" Mo Chenga smiled and said, "We're fine. We got some identity tablets, but we really can't hold on any more today. Senior Marshal Brother Su, how about you?" Su Jingji sighed. "Don't mention it. It's our bad luck. Not long after we split up, we ran into 5 Jindao school disciples who were also teleported there. We didn't have time to inform you guys before we were teleported out." Sure enough, it was just as she guessed. Mo Chenga comforted him. "So that's how it is. It's really bad luck. It's not your fault." Qin Shi nodded and asked, "Where's Senior Marshal Brother Jiang?" Su Jingji said, "Senior Marshal Brother Jiang doesn't look well. He probably prepared very carefully and found it hard to accept. We separated right after we came out, so I don't know where he is now." He then asked excitedly, "How's your harvest? You only came out today, so it should be pretty good, right?" Mo Chenga smiled and said, "We're just fishing in troubled waters, so it's not bad." Su Jingji's face was filled with envy when he heard what she said. He said, "It's good that you got something. Unlike us who prepared for so long, alas." The 3 of them chatted for a while. Several people appeared from the transporting formation. They were the people who fought with them, but Lu Yidao and Senior Marshal Brother Zhou were nowhere to be seen. Mo Chenga and Qin Shi exchanged glances. They understood that Senior Marshal Brother Zhou and the others had finally made it through. Chapter 54. On the third day, few people came out of the transporting formation. Like the other disciples, Mo Chenga meditated on the mountaintop. Although the spiritual aura on the mountaintop couldn't compare to the spiritual aura in the north peak of Mount Yunwu, it wasn't much worse than the spiritual aura in the south peak. Most cultivators cultivated in a race against time and didn't waste any time. Even the sect heads of the 3 cultivation groups and the foundation building cultivators who came with them didn't waste any time meditating. During this time, Mo Chenga had already stabilized her cultivation realm. Moreover, after several fights of magical power, she also gained some new insights into the use of spiritual aura, so she had to carefully study them. Some things had to be understood in fights of magical power. Listening to lectures wasn't enough. Time passed bit by bit. On the morning of the 4th day, the 3 sect heads and the seniors who were meditating opened their eyes one after another. Sect head Li of Wuxia sect said, "Time's up." Sect head Fang of Yunwu sect and sect head Jin of Jindao school nodded solemnly. Soon after, the 3 of them stood up and stood in 3 different directions around the transporting formation. Then they circulated their spiritual aura together and launched a joint attack. An unbearable power spread out, and disciples of the 3 cultivation groups appeared around the transporting formation one after another. The 3 sect heads worked together again, and the transporting formation instantly disappeared from the mountaintop. Mo Chenga looked around. There were only 50 to 60 people in total, most of whom were Wuxia sect disciples. There was no one from Jindao school, and there were more than 10 people from Yunwu sect, including senior martial brother Zhou's group of 4. Sect head Fang's and sect head Jin's expressions changed. Especially sect head Jin, whose face was so dark that ink could drip from it. Mo Chenga also frowned. Wuxia sect's strength seemed to be beyond her imagination. This was only a corner of the eastern side of Kunwu mountain range. There were no big cultivation groups here, only these 3 medium-sized cultivation groups. They kept each other in check and united against external forces. If one of them was too strong, it wouldn't be a good thing. The balance would probably be broken. Sect head Li of Wuxia sect remained calm and collected. He smiled and said, "Fellow Taoists, we should count the results." Sect head Jin's face was still dark. Sect head Fang finally restrained his emotions and said, "As Brother Li said." Then he walked to Yunwu sect's side and shouted, "Disciples, hand over all the identity tablets you got. No tricks." After sect leader Fang said that, the foundation building cultivator who was waiting at the side raised his voice and said, "Hand over your identity tokens one by one. Don't push and shove." Junior martial brother Yi, let's go. Qin Shi, who was sitting on the side, turned around and said. Mo Chenga nodded, then stood up and dusted off her sleeves. She then followed the flow of people and walked to the side to line up. There weren't too many people who managed to get their identity tablets. The aura-refining disciples sitting on the ground with disappointed expressions on their faces were all cleared at once. There were only about 100 people in the queue. Soon it was Mo Chenga's turn. When the foundation building cultivator took the bag from her, a strange expression flashed across his face. When he finished counting the number inside the bag, he looked at her cautiously and recorded, Yi Xiaotian, a total of 84 identity tablets. Mo Chenga saluted him, then retreated. Qin Shi, a total of 22 identity tablets. Upon hearing this, Mo Chenga paused for a moment. Her heart was filled with complicated feelings. Qin Shi gave her about 20 identity tablets. Not to mention the possibility of getting into the top 3, the identity tablets alone were worth 200 spirit stones. If it wasn't because she was in urgent need of spirit stones, she really wouldn't want to accept this favor. After all, a debt of gratitude was the hardest to repay. When they returned to their original spot, Su Jingji's expression was filled with envy. Junior martial brother Yi, I really didn't expect you to get into the top 3 now. When he heard the record just now, he was shocked. He never expected there would be so many. This was a huge amount of money. Qin Shi, who came back later, said, I'll be honest with you, junior martial brother Su. In fact, in order to get that reward, the 2 of us gathered our identity tablets in one place. This way, splitting the reward equally is better than neither of us getting anything at all. Su Jingji suddenly understood. I see. But the 2 of you are still very amazing. You actually managed to get more than 100 identity tablets. Mo Chenga said, It's all because senior martial brother Lu was there that we could fish in troubled waters. Otherwise, if we were alone, we might have already been surrounded and forced out. Su Jingji nodded. You're right. Senior martial brother Lu's cultivation technique is indeed very suitable for fights of magical powers in Miwu Valley. After successfully diverting Su Jingji's attention, The two of them smiled at each other. They were very good at fooling people. By the way, what about senior marshal brother Lu? He made a huge profit this time. He persevered until the end, so he got 2 bottles of aura-converging pills, in addition to the reward in his hand. Alas, he'll get a lot of spirit stones even if he sells them. Su Jingji became even more envious when he thought of the luckiest Louis Dao. Louis Dao's straightforward laughter came from behind them. Junior marshal brothers, I'm really indebted to you. The 3 of them turned around and saw Louis Dao walking towards them happily despite being exhausted. One after another they called out, Senior Marshal Brother Lu. After greeting them, Louis Dao first thanked Mo Chenga and Qin Shi. I still haven't thanked Junior Marshal Brothers. If it weren't for you risking your lives to get rid of those people, we probably wouldn't have been able to persevere. Mo Chenga smiled. Senior Marshal Brother Lu, what are you talking about? It was just a matter of convenience. At that time, I indeed couldn't persevere any longer. In fact, I've implicated Senior Marshal Brother Qin. Qin Shi shook his head. It was just a coincidence. I just wanted to lend a hand, but unexpectedly we came out together. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, don't take it to heart. Senior Marshal Brother Lu, don't take it to heart. As they talked about that fight of magical powers, Su Jingji was especially jealous. The 3 of you really don't give me any face. Let's go back and talk about this slowly. Aren't you trying to provoke me by talking about this in front of me? Louis Dao burst into laughter and patted Su Jingji's shoulder. Junior Marshal Brother Su, you also have to remember this. Fortunately, it was you and Junior Marshal Brother Jiang who encountered those 5 Jingdao school disciples. Otherwise, I would have been in trouble. Su Jingji rolled his eyes. Senior Marshal Brother Lu, you think I haven't been provoked enough? Louis Dao laughed again. Mo Chenga couldn't help but shake her head with a smile. In fact, she could be considered lucky, right? With Yi Xiaoyan's identity, she made these friends. No matter what would happen in the future, she should cherish today's friendship. When the 3 cultivation groups finished recording, the 3 school heads once again gathered in one place. Jingdao school head Jin still didn't look well. Zixia sect school head Li still had a smile on his face. As for Yunwu sect school head Fang, his expression was no longer gloomy. Because according to the statistics just now, although Yunwu sect didn't have many disciples who persisted until the end, the number of identity tablets they obtained was extremely high, so they could finally save their face. The disciples couldn't hear what the 3 school heads were talking about, but they soon dispersed. The school heads called out to the others and each of them led their disciples away on their flying magic weapons. Several hours later they returned to Yunwu sect square. The school head made a final announcement. Disciples, Yunwu sect's performance in this Miwu Valley competition is acceptable, but you mustn't be complacent. You have to know that we're still far from being comparable to Zixia sect, so we must continue to work hard. Alright, the competition in Miwu Valley is over. I'll now announce the rewards for the final winners and the top 3 who obtained identity tablets. School head Fang frowned when he saw the names reported by the foundation building disciples, but he didn't say anything. He raised his voice and announced, I'll now announce the names of the final 13 winners. Zhou Jinan, Louis Dao, Li Rongxing, Murongzi, Wang Qianyi, Shenbing. The 3 who obtained the most identity tablets are Zhou Jinan 92, Yi Xiaotian 84, Li Rongxing 76. I hope the other disciples can follow their example and cultivate diligently to strengthen Yunwu sect. Alright, you've been working hard these past 3 days. Go back and rest. The rewards for the identity tablets will be distributed tomorrow. The disciples who obtain the final winners and the top 3 prizes, please come to the steward's hall to receive them. Mo Chenga heaved a sigh of relief when she heard the definite results. Fortunately, she accepted Qin Shi's identity tablet. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to obtain these rewards. She immediately spoke to Qin Shi and Su Jingji, then went to the steward's hall with Louis Dao. Louis Dao patted her shoulder and said with a smile, You and Junior Marshal Brother Qin are really smart. Obtaining these rewards isn't much worse than obtaining the final victory. Louis Dao was more than a head taller than her, and he was also very strong. Mo Chenga grimaced in pain from his pat. Senior Marshal Brother Lu, I'm very thin and weak. Don't use too much strength. Upon seeing her expression, Louis Dao hastily withdrew his hand. He then said with great puzzlement, Junior Marshal Brother Yi, you seem to be 18 years old, right? Why are you still so thin? Your waist is as thin as a girl's. Mo Chenga hastily said, There's nothing I can do about being small. Maybe I'll grow taller in the future. Then waist? Then I'll go back and wrap it around my waist a few more times. Chapter 55. After receiving their rewards in the steward's hall, Mo Tiange and Louis Dao chatted and laughed as they returned to their residence. Senior Marshal Brother Zhou came back earlier than them. At the moment he was tidying up the spiritual plants he had neglected for several days. When he saw them he smiled and nodded at them. Senior Marshal Brother Zhou's name was Zhou Jinan. This time he was the one who won first place. The two rewards really made people envious. Because they traveled together in Miwu Valley, he treated them differently from before. Mo Tiange and Louis Dao hastily returned his greeting, then returned to their rooms. Qin Shi and Su Jingji were still waiting for them in the small hall. Jiang Shanghang's room was filled with spiritual aura, so he must have returned to cultivate. This time it must have been a big blow to him, but they weren't familiar with him, so there was nothing to say. After chatting for a while, the four of them went their separate ways. Mo Tiange hesitated for a moment but still went to knock on the door next door. The door opened and Qin Shi stood behind it. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, is there something else? Mo Tiange looked at his hand holding the door and raised her eyebrows. Senior Marshal Brother Qin, aren't you going to invite me in? Qin Shi smiled, let go of her hand and turned around to enter the room. This room was different from the others. She hadn't seen Jiang Shanghang's room, but she had seen Su Jingji and Louis Dao's. Su Jingji's room was the same as hers. The bedding and praying mats were changed by themselves, and the tea set and so on were all brought from home. As for Louis Dao, he didn't add many things. Aside from cultivation needs, there was nothing else. The room in front of her was different from theirs. The praying mats weren't things from the school, so she could feel they weren't ordinary. On the table there was a green jade tea set, sparkling and translucent, containing spiritual aura. Obviously it wasn't ordinary either. In the middle of the room, there was a cauldron that seemed to be a pill-concocting furnace. The room was surrounded by formation tools. Praying mats, tea set, pill-concocting furnace and formation. Only these four things were added, but none of them were ordinary. She couldn't see through the other three things, but she could see some clues about the formation. This was a compound formation that combined defense, spiritual aura gathering, restriction on divine sense and isolation of spiritual aura. Inside this formation, the density of spiritual aura was comparable to that of the North Peak. She inwardly speculated that based on her and second uncle's attainments and formations, they definitely wouldn't be able to create such a formation. This formation must have been created by a cultivator in the core formation realm or above. If it was put on the market, it would fetch at least several thousand spirit stones. She turned around and saw Qin Shi looking at her with a faint smile on his face. Realizing that she had lost her composure, she said, "Senior Marshal Brother Qin, we've received our rewards. Let's split them now." As she spoke, she took out a cloth bag from her Qingkuan bag and said, "There are 700 spirit stones here. The medallion Senior Apprentice Brother gave me can be exchanged for 200 spirit stones. As for the reward, I urgently need Qi gathering pills. Senior Apprentice Brother's cultivation base is already at the 10th layer, so I don't think you need them that much. So I think the spirit stones are yours and the Qi gathering pills are mine." Qin Shi only glanced at her and said, "Since I said I'm compensating you, I naturally won't ask you for it. You can use it yourself. Although Senior Brother doesn't want it, I think it's better for us to be clear about it. After all, I don't want to attract attention. I came out early, but it's not just because of you." Qin Shi muttered to himself for a moment, then took the cloth bag. He took out a handful of spirit stones and threw the rest back to her. Mo Tiange was puzzled. There are about 200 spirit stones in here. Just take it as returning my identity medallion. As for the reward, you'll have to bear part of the risk when you receive it. I don't want it. Besides, do you think I'm lacking spirit stones? Mo Tiange could only smile bitterly at this question. Looking at the things in this room, this Senior Apprentice Brother Qin probably didn't care about these several hundred spirit stones, so she could only say, "All right, I'll accept Senior Apprentice Brother's kindness today." Qin Shi nodded, then asked, "Is there anything else, Junior Apprentice Brother?" "No." Mo Tiange paused for a moment, then said helplessly, "Then I'll take my leave." Qin Shi revealed a faint smile. He was obviously very satisfied with her tactfulness. "Junior Apprentice Brother Yi, please go ahead." He said please, but in fact he just wanted to ask her to leave, right? Mo Tiange felt even more helpless, but she also didn't want to stay, so she followed his wishes and pushed the door open to leave. After returning to her room, she first took a bath, then lay on the bed in a daze. This time she could be said to have gained quite a lot. 1,000 spirit stones, a bottle of aura-converging pills, and the bottle of aura-converging pills she already had were enough for her to cultivate without worrying about spirit stones for the next 2 years until she reached the 10th layer of the aura-refining realm. However, when she thought about Qin Shi, she couldn't help but feel puzzled. In fact, she only said a few words to probe him, so she didn't know he had secrets. However, this person didn't seem to be afraid of her knowing he had ulterior motives and seemed certain she wouldn't divulge them. Why was he so sure? As she thought about it, she suddenly felt her hair stand on end. Could it be that her secret was discovered? Was that why he was so sure? Now that she thought about it carefully, this senior apprentice brother Qin did treat her a little differently from other people, but she couldn't tell what exactly was different. She couldn't figure it out no matter how she thought about it, so she shook her head and decided to sleep first. Tomorrow she would go down the mountain and ask second uncle. Second uncle had a lot of experience, so he would definitely be able to tell her what to do. She closed her eyes and soon fell asleep. However, she kept dreaming today. First, she dreamed of her childhood. Her mother was still in good health and was cooking in the kitchen. She was only 3 or 4 years old, sitting on a small stool and watching. Then she dreamed of Liu Shan. She didn't understand the human furnace when she was young, but now that she knew what it meant, she became even more terrified. Then she dreamed of Yi Jingguan. She and second uncle were taken back to Shenqing school and were at their disposal. Then she dreamed of Yunwu sect. Her secret was exposed and she was forced to kneel in front of the sect head of True Treasure Hall, waiting to be punished. Mo Qiange woke up with a head full of sweat. She felt weak. It seemed she was really scared yesterday. She patted her forehead and went outside to get some water. After washing herself, she prepared to go down the mountain. She first went to the sect's shop to get the spirit stones she used to sell formations and exchanged them for healing medicinal pills before returning to the small courtyard she used to live in with second uncle. She opened the formation and walked into the courtyard. Before she could knock on the door, she heard second uncle's voice. Xiao Tian? Mo Qiange pushed the door open. Second uncle, it's me. A smile appeared on Yi Zhang's old face, but Mo Qiange was dumbfounded. After not seeing him for a month, second uncle looked even more tired. His face was gray and his hair was white. He looked extremely old. She finally realized that without her knowledge, second uncle had already become like this. With second uncle's cultivation level, even if he had no hope of advancing to the core formation realm, he could have found a small cultivation group and lived the rest of his life in peace. However, in the past 7 or 8 years, second uncle took her everywhere to avoid Shenqing school, racking his brains to earn spirit stones. In the end, he ended up in a situation where he was seriously injured. Second uncle. Tears welled up in her eyes. She whispered, "Did your injuries worsen? Why didn't you tell me?" Yi Jiang looked at her and smiled. Xiaodian. Qiange, according to second uncle's estimation, I don't have much time left in my life, so my injuries haven't healed. Although we, cultivators, have a lifespan that surpasses mortals, we still have to die. Don't be sad. This day will come eventually. But, Yi Jiang waved his hand to stop her. I can feel that I only have 2 or 3 years at most. Even if my injuries are healed, it won't be enough. Now that you're in the 8th layer of the aura refining realm, second uncle hopes to see you advance to the foundation building realm before I pass away. At that time, even if I die, I'll be able to rest in peace. Tears involuntarily fell from her eyes. Upon hearing what he said, she hastily wiped them away, took out her Chengkuan bag, poured out spirit stones and medicinal pills and said with a smile, "Second uncle, look, I won a lot of people in Miwu Valley. These rewards are enough for me to cultivate until the 10th layer of the aura refining realm." Yi Jiang smiled. Second uncle always believed you could do it. Don't worry, second uncle will definitely hold on until that time. Therefore you have to cultivate diligently, understand? Mo Qiange nodded, but she felt bitter in her heart. She knew this day would come eventually. Ever since second uncle was injured, he kept reminding her that he didn't have much time left in his life. Cultivators naturally had to be indifferent to life and death, but although she understood this, she couldn't help but feel sad. 10 years ago, it was her mother who abandoned her. Now it was second uncle. The most important people by her side always left her. Alright, tell me about your trip to Miwu Valley. Second uncle can give you some pointers. Mo Qiange calmed down and told him everything about Miwu Valley in detail. Finally she talked about Qin Shi. Yi Jiang was silent for a long time before he said, "That person's background must be extraordinary. According to what you said, he's so experienced in fights of magical powers and doesn't lack treasures. He really doesn't seem like an aura-refining cultivator. Unless he's not an individual cultivator and has a high-level cultivator as an elder, or he had other fortuitous encounters, you don't have to worry. He obviously doesn't have any ulterior motives toward you from what he did. You just need to reduce your contact with him in the future. Mo Chinga felt a bit relieved. I understand. I won't care about what he does. We'll just continue our relationship like before. Correct. You should go back and continue cultivating. Second uncle doesn't have much time, so you have to hurry. Mo Chinga was silent. In the end, she listened to him and said, I understand, second uncle. Chapter 56. After returning to Mount Yunwu, Mo Chinga officially entered closed-door meditation. Aside from going back to see second uncle every half a month, she no longer went out for a stroll. Occasionally, when she came out of closed-door meditation, she would find summoning talismans for Murong Yen, Wang Qianni, and even Shen Bing. Originally, she didn't have any friendship with them, but after the trip to Miwu Valley they became closer. When they learned that she was cultivating in closed-door meditation, they all came to greet her. Shen Bing and Wang Qianni even said that if she needed any help, she could just ask. Mo Chinga knew it wasn't appropriate for her to have too much contact with them, so she only responded politely and didn't ask for anything. Every time she came out and ran into the other senior martial brothers living with her, she was laughed at. Su Jingji was even more envious and jealous. He said that although she looked good, her skinny appearance didn't look like a man at all. She obviously wasn't as tall, handsome, and elegant as him, so why were the famous beautiful senior martial sisters in the sect so good to her? Mo Chinga smiled bitterly in her heart, feeling even more distressed. Men and women were different. She increasingly felt that pretending to be a man was getting more and more tiring. If her cultivation level was high, she could directly use the illusory technique and pretend to be whatever she wanted. However, she was just a small aura refining cultivator. If she wanted to use the illusory technique to deceive high-level cultivators, wasn't that just courting death? 2 years passed in a flash. Although she grew a little taller, it was very little. She wasn't considered tall among women, let alone among men. Lu Yidao was a head taller than her, Qin Shi was a head taller, and even Su Jingji, who wasn't considered tall, was half a head taller than her. Perhaps it was because she was too unlucky. The men in the room were all tall, making her look even thinner. Coupled with her thin shoulders and thin body, even though she had been dressing as a woman for many years and no longer looked like a woman, she was still very eye-catching. Su Jingji laughed at her more than once, saying that she looked like a man but looked like a woman. Although it didn't arouse anyone's suspicion, it gave Mo Chinga a wake-up call and constantly reminded her to be careful. 2 years later, when she ran out of spirit stones, she finally reached the 10th layer of the aura refining realm. At this time, Yunwu sect's minor competition was about to begin. Therefore, she left closed-door meditation after her realm stabilized. As soon as she came out, the other 3 were already waiting in the small hall. In the past 3 years, Lu Yidao and Qin Shi's cultivation levels had become even more exquisite. Although Su Jingji was a bit inferior, he also rushed into the 9th layer of the aura refining realm and wasn't far from the 10th layer. In order to celebrate her coming out of seclusion, the group decided to go sightseeing and have a picnic. More than once, Murong Yen expressed that she missed her roasted beast meat, so she also sent a summoning talisman to invite her. Since she was invited, she naturally invited Wang Qianni and Shen Bing as well. At the same time, she also notified senior martial brother Zhou. Originally, Mo Chinga thought that although Murong Yen would definitely come, Shen Bing and Wang Qianni might not necessarily come, let alone senior martial brother Zhou. Who would have thought that not a single one would be missing? The group of people chatted and barbecued by the waterfall pool on the southern peak. Mo Chinga sat by the water's edge, struggling to skewer a row of beast meat. She used the fire spiritual art with her left hand and spread flames on the beast meat. Not far away, under a tree, there was a piece of linen cloth with tea and snacks on it. On the side, Lu Yidao and senior martial brother Zhou were exchanging cultivation insights. Su Jingji was sitting next to Shen Bing and Wang Qian to join in on the fun. Qin Shi was lazily leaning against a tree, basking in the sun. Murong Yen was sitting next to her, staring at the skewers while drooling. From time to time she would ask if they were done. This group of people said they were celebrating her reaching the 10th layer of the aura refining realm, but in the end they said that her barbecuing skills were pretty good, so they just let her do the barbecuing for everyone. Alas. When she finally finished barbecuing a batch, she wiped her sweat, then placed it on a tray and handed it to Murong Yen. It's done. Call them over to eat. There was no need for anyone to call them. Once they saw that Mo Chinga had finished barbecuing, those people who were originally very leisurely swarmed over like a swarm of bees. Each of them took a handful and gorged themselves. After Su Jingji finished gnawing on the meat in his hand, he shouted, "It's really delicious. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, give me a few more pieces." Mo Chenga, who had just washed her hands by the waterfall, rolled her eyes when she heard what he said. "If you light the fire, I'll barbecue it for you." Su Jingji scratched his head. "Light the fire? But I don't have fire spiritual roots, so I can't use fire spells." The group of people laughed. Senior Marshal Brother Zhou said, "Junior Marshal Brother Ye's cooking skills are really good. It's much better than the ones in our dining hall." Murong Yen nodded repeatedly. "Yeah, I haven't eaten it for 2 years. I've been craving it to death." Louis Dao rubbed his belly. "This little bit isn't enough. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, barbecue more." Mo Chenga sighed. "Someone come and light the fire for me, okay? My fire spells are really not that good. I'm really tired after doing it for half a day." Murong Yen hastily said, "I also don't have fire spiritual roots. How about I use talismans? I have several fire talismans here. We can't waste them like this." Su Jingji immediately interjected, "Senior Marshal Brother Qin is the best at fire spells. Senior Marshal Brother Qin, come and help me." Ever since this brat met his 3 senior marshal sisters, he was extremely attentive. Needless to say, he always called Xin Bing and Wang Qinyi senior marshal sister. His mouth seemed to be smeared with honey. Mo Chenga shook her head and smiled. She saw Qin Shi's helpless expression, but she didn't refuse. She stood up and dusted off her sleeves, then walked over. "That'll do. I won't eat for free. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, please tell me what you want." Mo Chenga naturally wouldn't be polite. Qin Shi majored in fire spells, so he wasn't half as good as her. She took out a thin blade, cut the beast meat piece by piece and strung it with a tree branch. She then said to Qin Shi, "Senior Marshal Brother Qin, don't burn it too fiercely. If you burn the tree branch, it'll be a waste." Qin Shi nodded and placed his right palm on the meat. Flames suddenly appeared and soon the aroma of meat drifted out. Mo Chenga saw that the situation wasn't good, so she hastily said, "Senior Marshal Brother Qin, slow down." She hadn't seasoned the meat yet and hadn't turned the meat over yet. She didn't want it to be burnt. Alas, it's not good to have a powerful fire spell. It's not convenient to control the heat. However, with Qin Shi's help, the roasting was a lot faster. Before long, the roasted meat was piled up to the brim, and the 2 of them finally stopped. "Okay, this should be enough for you, right?" Mo Chenga tidied up the food and pushed the tray to Murong Yen. This plate of meat was half a spiritual deer. Murong Yen cheered, "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, you're the best." By the time she finished washing her face and went back, there was only half a plate of meat left on the plate. Qin Shi leaned against a tree and said with a smile, "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, you should drink some tea and eat some snacks. This plate, I think it's enough for them." Mo Chenga rolled her eyes. They roasted the meat for a long time, but she still couldn't eat it. Louis Dao laughed and patted her shoulder. "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, who told you to be so good at cooking? Capable people do more work. Good, good, good. I really owe you guys." In any case, she could already abstain from eating, so she didn't like to eat as much as before. After eating the roasted meat, they chatted while drinking tea. The topic of their conversation couldn't deviate from the group's minor competition that was going to happen soon. Generally, there were minor competitions and major competitions in cultivation groups. The major competition was usually held once every several decades or even once every century. Cultivators in the aura refining, foundation building, and core formation realms would participate. However, only aura refining disciples participated in the minor competition, and it was held once every 10 years or less. Although the rewards of the major competition were generous, it was too far away from them. Aura refining disciples usually paid more attention to the minor competition because it was related to the distribution of foundation building pills. Among them, Su Jingji and Murong Yen were in the 9th layer of the aura refining realm, Senior Marshal Brother Zhou was in the 11th layer, and the others were in the 10th layer. Aside from Senior Marshal Brother Zhou, everyone else had to participate in the minor competition. Only by participating in the minor competition could they obtain foundation building pills. Only with foundation building pills could they build their foundation. However, they were only a medium-sized cultivation group. Every 10 years, 20 to 30 foundation building pills would be distributed, and only about 10% of them would succeed. Among them, aside from Senior Marshal Brother Zhou, who would definitely advance to the foundation building realm, it was hard to say what would happen to the others. Among several hundred people, it was already difficult to fight for a spot, let alone obtaining a foundation building pill. In fact, taking foundation-building pills wasn't the only way to build one's foundation. It was just that ordinary people didn't even need to think about the other methods. Taking ancient spiritual panaceas, pouring spiritual aura into one's body through a secret technique by a high-level nascent soul cultivator, or obtaining other fated chances that suddenly poured a large amount of spiritual aura into one's body could allow one to make a breakthrough in their realm. How could these methods be thought of by ordinary cultivators like them? Only foundation establishment pills could have any hope of doing so. The more they talked about this topic, the heavier it became. In the end, everyone lost interest in talking, so they simply ended the gathering and went back to their respective places. Emo Chinga's heart was heavy. Although she had advanced to the 10th layer and had a 50% chance of obtaining a spot, she didn't even have a 10% chance of successfully building her foundation. She didn't forget that she had 5 spiritual roots. Emo family's ancestor Emo Yaoqing once said that she didn't have ordinary 5 spiritual roots and that she had the spiritual roots of the origin, an average of 5 spiritual roots. She inherited it from another ancestor. If she had a specific cultivation technique, the cultivation speed of someone with the spiritual roots of the origin wouldn't be slow. However, after entering the cultivation world for so long, she and second uncle had searched through all the books and records, yet they still didn't know anything about the spiritual roots of the origin. 2 years ago, second uncle said he only had 2 to 3 years left in his lifespan. Now 2 years had passed and she had smoothly advanced to the 10th layer of the aura refining realm. However, she discovered that the path to immortality was vague, and the path to building her foundation was still far from her. Chapter 57. Not long after, the Stewards' Hall announced the date of the minor competition, and Senior Marshal Brother Zhou brought specific information. The minor competition of aura refining cultivators in the 7th layer and above could register. In this minor competition, the top 30 would receive a foundation building pill as a reward, as well as spirit stones and so on. Everyone looked happy when they heard the news. The top 30 would receive a reward. It seemed the sex pill concocting this time went very smoothly. Although the foundation building pill wasn't an ancient miraculous medicine, its materials weren't common. Usually, the sect would spend several years to concoct one furnace of pills, and the success rate of this furnace would affect the rewards of the minor competition. When luck was bad, there would only be about 10 finished pills from one furnace. After deducting the quota for 11th and 12th layer aura refining disciples, as well as some reserved for disciples with great contributions, the rest would be the rewards of the minor competition. In this way, only the top 10 would receive a reward. But this time the top 30 would receive a reward. Their luck was really good. The minor competition was also a ring competition, but after drawing lots they would fight each other in pairs. The winner would advance until the first place was decided. Therefore, this kind of competition made many people feel lucky. If the opponent they drew wasn't strong, it would be easy for them to get a high ranking. However, entering the top 50 basically couldn't rely on luck. There were about 400 cultivators in the 7th layer and above, and after 3 rounds of competition, only those who entered the top 50 would enter the top 50. Aura refining disciples in the 7th layer and above began to prepare one after another. For a while, the prices of talismans, medicinal pills, and spirit tools increased by 2 times compared to usual. Emo Chinga rejoiced that she was prepared long ago. Otherwise, she wouldn't have any money to buy things. The spirit stones she had were almost used up during her 2 years of closed-door meditation. This time, second uncle prepared a lot of talismans and medicinal pills for her. When she found out, she discovered that second uncle sold some of his belongings. Because of this, Emo Chinga secretly made up her mind. Even if it was for second uncle, she had to obtain the foundation building pill. Soon after, Senior Marshal Brother Zhou brought another piece of news. Wuxia sect invited the 3 groups to hold a minor competition together to motivate their disciples. This wasn't the first time in the history of the 3 groups. In the past, the 3 groups indeed held a minor competition together, but this was the first time they held one together with such a huge difference in strength. For this reason, Jindao school head Jin wasn't happy about it. In the end, Wuxia sect school head Li proposed that Wuxia sect take out some foundation building pills as the reward for the overall ranking. As for the rewards for the internal ranking of the 3 groups, the 3 groups would distribute them among themselves. This made Jin Zhangmen feel a little more comfortable. Even if no disciple of Jindao school received the reward, they wouldn't lose anything. It was just that they would lose face. However, if they refused, they would become a laughing stock and people would gossip that the Jindao school was weak and timid. Therefore they could only bite the bullet and agree, hoping that one or two disciples could live up to expectations. She couldn't understand Wuxia sect's purpose. Although Wuxia sect expressed that they would only take out 10 foundation-building pills, these 10 foundation-building pills could possibly add 1 or 2 foundation-building cultivators to their sect. Was it really necessary to make such a contribution just to save face? While the 4 of them were chatting in the small living room, Jiang Shanghong, who rarely came out, snorted coldly when he heard what Mo Chenga said. It'll look good on your face, so it'll be much easier for you to recruit disciples with good aptitudes in the future. In the long run, the benefits will be much greater than having 1 or 2 foundation-building cultivators. Everyone was silent. Although no one liked Jiang Shanghong, he was still a disciple of Jiang clan, so the way he looked at things was very different from them. What he said was also very reasonable. If they became famous in the future, all the children with spiritual roots in this area would go to Wuxia sect first, and they would be able to pick those with good aptitudes first. If a few of them had single or mutated spiritual roots in the future, the gap between them and the other 2 groups would only grow bigger and bigger. This wasn't something that 1 or 2 foundation-building cultivators could pull back. After he finished speaking, Jiang Shanghong once again returned to his room. In the past few years he still ignored everyone and only focused on cultivating. Now he only lacked foundation-building pills, so it seemed he was determined to win this minor competition. Su Jingji stared at the door of Jiang Shanghong's room and asked the 3 people in amazement, "Did you guys see that? Senior Marshal Brother Jiang actually talked to us. Is that true?" His tone made Mo Chenga laugh. "It's not like Senior Marshal Brother Jiang doesn't talk to us. It was just that his tone wasn't very good and he didn't talk to us too often." Qin Shi, who was drawing talismans on the table, raised his head. "Junior Marshal Brother Su, are you ready?" This question touched Su Jingji's sore spot. With a bitter expression he said, "No, my big brother also wants to participate in the minor competition. My clan supports him, so I can only make do with some talismans. In any case, it's better than us." Louis Dao stopped cultivating and said, "You still have your clan's support. We, on the other hand, are genuine individual cultivators with no one to rely on. Aside from the sect's supplies, we don't have anything else." Su Jingji jumped up and shouted, "Senior Marshal Brother Lu, you're still talking. Last time, in Miwu Valley's competition, how many rewards did you get?" Louis Dao scratched his head. "It's been 2 years, yet Junior Marshal Brother Su still remembers." Su Jingji snorted. "Of course I didn't get anything. Otherwise I would have advanced to the 10th layer like Junior Marshal Brother Yi. I really don't want to call Junior Marshal Brother Yi Marshal Uncle in the future. How could it be that easy?" Mo Chenga sighed. "Senior Marshal Brother Su, it's not like you don't know that I have 5 spiritual roots. Being able to cultivate to the 10th layer of the aura refining realm is already my good fortune. As for advancing to the foundation building realm, how many cultivators with 5 spiritual roots can successfully advance to the foundation building realm?" At this point, Su Jingji also shook his head and smiled bitterly. "Although I have 4 spiritual roots, my cultivation has always been mediocre, so I could only enter the sect through the Immortals Assembly. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, being able to cultivate to this stage with 5 spiritual roots. You're indeed better than me." The 2 of them looked at each other and sighed, making the atmosphere very depressing. Qin Shi, who was still concentrating on drawing talismans, said, "Although aptitude is important, it's not the only thing. Some nascent soul cultivators aren't geniuses with single or mutated spiritual roots. More than half of them have double or even 3 spiritual roots." Mo Chenga had never heard of this before. "Why is that?" Qin Shi flicked his finger, burning the broken talisman. He then glanced at her and said, "Cultivators with single or mutated spiritual roots can advance through the realms very quickly and easily advance to the core formation realm. However, it's precisely because of this that their temperaments aren't firm enough, so they haven't been tested by their inner demons. Once they reach the nascent soul realm, aptitude doesn't play much of a role, but temperaments do. They can easily cultivate to the peak stage of the core formation realm, but they often fail at the inner demons during the nascent soul realm. On the other hand, it's not easy for cultivators with double or 3 spiritual roots to cultivate to the core formation realm. They usually have to go through trials, but their willpower is firm. When they reach the nascent soul realm, their lifespans are usually more than half, and their temperaments and experiences can withstand the trials. Therefore, although it's not easy for them to cultivate, it's much safer for them to form their nascent soul." The other 3 people had never heard of this before, so they were all amazed. "So doesn't that mean cultivators with double or 3 spiritual roots are better? Why doesn't the sect attach importance to them? Qin Shi raised the corners of his mouth, looking like he was smiling. Now he also smiled occasionally, so he looked a bit more human compared to when he first arrived. That being said, how many people have single or mutated spiritual roots? Although double spiritual roots are a bit rare, triple spiritual roots are everywhere. A cultivation group has 5,000 aura refining disciples, but there might only be 2 or 3 with single or mutated spiritual roots, 4 to 500 with double spiritual roots, and more than 4,000 with triple spiritual roots. As long as there are no accidents, these 2 or 3 people with single or mutated spiritual roots will advance to the core formation realm. However, among these 4,000 people with double or mutated spiritual roots, only about 10 people will advance to the core formation realm. If they form their nascent soul, the former is half, while the latter might not even have one. Speaking up to this point, even he sighed. The path to the nascent soul realm is indeed much more difficult than we imagined. Those with good aptitudes can smoothly advance to the core formation realm even if they don't have enough comprehension and effort. Those with poor aptitudes, not to mention the nascent soul realm, even reaching the core formation realm requires several times the effort. Once he finished speaking, the other 3 people sank into silence. After a long time, Louis Dao finally said, "Not to mention the core formation realm and the nascent soul realm, even building our foundation is a problem for us." Yes, Su Jingji said, among more than 400 aura refining disciples, perhaps only 2 or 3 will advance to the foundation building realm. I wonder if any of us will be able to move to the North Peak next year. Chapter 58. The Greenwood Sword, the talisman's second uncle prepared, seeds, spirit stones, healing medicinal pills and several simple formations. When she finished checking everything, Su Jingji knocked on the door. "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, are you done?" Mo Chenga answered, "I'm coming." In the courtyard outside the house, all the cultivators gathered together. Except for Senior Marshal Brother Zhou, everyone looked more or less nervous. They all entered the sect through the Immortals' Assembly. Their cultivation levels weren't weak, but they couldn't obtain foundation-building pills. It could be said that they all entered the sect for the sake of foundation-building pills. Mo Chenga was no exception. As individual cultivators, their biggest difficulty wasn't lacking spirit veins and medicinal pills, but not being able to obtain foundation-building pills. If spirit veins weren't good, they could make do. If they lacked medicinal pills, they could slowly earn money to buy them. With enough opportunities and diligence, reaching the 10th layer of the aura refining realm wouldn't be too difficult. However, individual cultivators had no way to obtain foundation-building pills. Cultivation groups and clans that had the ability to concoct foundation-building pills basically wouldn't sell them. Only under some special circumstances would they sell them. Even so, their prices were still sky-high. Every time they were sold for several thousand spirit stones, they simply couldn't be afforded by ordinary cultivators. Therefore, only by entering a sect would they have the opportunity to obtain foundation-building pills and possibly build their foundation. Senior Marshal Brother Zhou glanced at them and said, "I don't need to tell you how important today is. I think you all know it. Your future depends on your hard work today. Let's go." The venue of the minor competition was finally set at Wuxia sect. No one was surprised by this result. Since Wuxia sect deliberately wanted to show off, the result was bound to be like this. Yunwu sect, Wuxia sect, and Jindao school were the 3 great cultivation groups in the eastern region of Kunwu. The 3 groups depended on each other and also restrained each other, maintaining a subtle relationship. In the past, there had been cases where one group was particularly powerful. Usually, at that time, that group would become the leader of the 3 groups. Judging from the current situation, Wuxia sect was obviously pursuing this position. However, this had nothing to do with young aura refining disciples like them. No matter what happened to the higher-ups, they just needed to cultivate well and wouldn't be implicated. On the day of the minor competition, sect leader Feng appeared in front of everyone again. This time he was even more cautious than during the competition in Miwu Valley. There were 5 core formation cultivators. In the entire Yunwu sect, there were only 7 or 8 core formation cultivators in total. Most of them, excluding those who were in closed-door meditation, were all here. Mo Chenga frowned inwardly. Apparently this minor competition was just a name. Most likely it was a competition between the 3 groups in private. It should be known that core formation cultivators normally wouldn't appear in front of ordinary disciples. They would only be able to see the sect head during events like joining the sect or the Miwu Valley competition. However, this was only a minor competition. It would be fine if it was just like the Miwu Valley competition, but there were actually 5 core formation cultivators accompanying them. It was clear that this wasn't a simple competition. It would take about 6 hours to travel from Yunwu sect to Wuxia sect on a core formation grandmaster's flying magic weapon, which was a bit further than Miwu Valley. By the time they arrived at Wuxia sect, all the Yunwu sect disciples felt like their horizons had been broadened. Wuxia sect was situated on top of a high mountain. This mountain was thousands of feet high and towered into the clouds. Neat and tidy jade steps stretched from the foot of the mountain all the way to the magnificent mountain gate. After that, there was a vast square and a lofty main hall. Looking down from the sky, Missouri Tienga had to admit that compared to Wuxia sect's grandeur, Yunwu sect seemed a bit small. Wuxia sect's square was more than twice the size of Yunwu sect's. All the aura-refining disciples participating in the minor competition were in the square, but it didn't feel crowded at all. Several fighting rings were neatly placed in the middle of the square. The disciples of the 3 groups each occupied a corner. Jingdao School had the least number of disciples compared to last time. The number of Yunwu sect's disciples increased slightly, but Wuxia sect's disciples were obviously the most numerous. The right side of the fighting ring was densely packed. After that, the disciples of the 3 groups drew lots. The total number of people was more than 1,000, so the time taken to draw lots was very long. Mo Chinga inadvertently raised her head and saw that the sect heads of the 3 groups weren't present. None of the core formation cultivators were present either. She confirmed her guess. It seemed today was indeed a competition between the 3 groups, and Wuxia sect wanted to suppress the other 2 groups. The preliminary round of the minor competition began under the arrangement of the foundation building cultivators. The number Mo Chinga drew was number 347, which was in the middle. It was neither good nor bad. This time they came together. After drawing lots, they went to their respective fighting rings. Mo Chinga's first opponent was number 348, an 8th layer aura refining disciple of Wuxia sect. Her opponent's cultivation level wasn't high, and his magical power was also ordinary. Under her greenwood sword's attack, he admitted defeat in less than a quarter of an hour. She jumped off the fighting ring feeling somewhat absent-minded. She didn't know why, but she felt restless ever since she arrived at Wuxia sect. The first round of the competition ended one after another. Just as the foundation building cultivators were about to discuss how to proceed with the second round of the competition, a hall of Wuxia sect not far from them suddenly collapsed with a loud rumble, emitting blazing flames. The aura-refining disciples in the square were in an uproar, and the foundation building cultivators' expressions changed greatly. From the ruins of that hall, several silhouettes rushed out. Each of them had a defensive magic barrier over their heads as they fought. They were obviously high-level cultivators. The spiritual aura pressure produced by their fights of magical power was extremely great, making it difficult for the aura-refining disciples to bear. Upon seeing this scene, a foundation-building cultivator from Yunwu sect suddenly raised his voice and shouted, "Yunwu sect's disciples, come here." The cultivators from Jingdao School came to their senses and also shouted, "Jingdao School's disciples, come here." The aura-refining disciples didn't understand what was going on, so they obeyed out of habit. In an instant, the square was thrown into chaos. The cultivators who were mixed together ran here and there, trampling on others from time to time. Amidst the chaos, Mo Chinga saw several familiar figures among the cultivators fighting with magical powers. Yunwu sect head Fang Dingyue, Wuxia sect head Li, and Jingdao School sect head Jin were nowhere to be seen. Apparently the 3 groups had a falling out. It was no wonder she felt restless just now. Those who studied formations were more sensitive to yin, yang, and the 5 elements, so they could occasionally sense bad luck. This was really bad. This was Wuxia sect, and she was only an aura-refining disciple with meager strength. If Yunwu sect and Jingdao School really had a falling out with Wuxia sect, aura-refining disciples like her would be in danger. Mo Chinga's face turned pale when she thought about this. "Li Mingzhang, you old fool. You actually plotted against me?" Flying in the air, Sect head Fang pointed at Sect head Li and cursed loudly. Sect head Li smiled lightly. "Fang Dingyue, now that things have come to this, you'd better admit defeat." As he spoke, he cast a glance at the square. "If you admit defeat, I'll leave some incense for your Yunwu sect today. Otherwise, these future pillars of Yunwu sect will all be gone." Although his tone was flat, the threat was obvious. Sect head Fang immediately bristled with anger and sneered repeatedly. "Don't be complacent. If I explode my gold core, your Wuxia sect won't be able to keep its incense." When a gold core cultivator detonated his gold core, even a nascent soul cultivator would be injured. If sect head Fang was ruthless enough to destroy indiscriminately, perhaps not a single disciple from the three groups would survive in the square. Mo Chinga's palms suddenly broke out in cold sweat. She couldn't be that unlucky, could she? If she died in the internal strife between the three groups before even building her foundation, she'd really die with everlasting regret. Sect head Li's expression remained unchanged. He smiled contemptuously and said, "Do you think we didn't guard against you when we dared to attack you? You might as well use your spiritual aura." Sect head Fang's complexion suddenly turned blue. "You dare to exterminate my Yunwu sect? Aren't you afraid that Elder Yen will come back and become hostile?" Elder Yen was the Grand Supreme Elder of Yunwu sect, the only nascent soul grandmaster in Yunwu sect. Sect head Li snorted. "Do you think we don't know? Your Elder Yen passed away 10 years ago. He just didn't dare to make it public." Once he said that, not only did sect head Fang's complexion turn pale, but all the Yunwu sect disciples in the square were also shocked. This matter was obviously Yunwu sect's top secret. Not to mention ordinary disciples like them, even foundation-building disciples didn't know about it. It seemed Wuxia sect's move had been planned for a long time. Mo Chinga hid in the crowd, trying hard to think about the current situation. Since she was in Wuxia sect, it was impossible for her to escape by herself. She could only wait and see how these people would deal with the Yunwu sect disciples. They couldn't possibly kill all of them, right? The more she thought about it, the more cold sweat covered her forehead. Second uncle was still waiting for her to bring back foundation-building pills. Who would have thought this was actually a trap? Chapter 59. The people in the square didn't know what happened in the main hall, but they all saw the result. When they heard Wuxia sect's sect head Li's order, sect head Fang was immediately beaten down. No one knew what they did to him, but he couldn't resist at all. The other core formation cultivators were nowhere to be seen. It was unclear whether they fell into a trap or were persuaded. Core formation cultivators cherished their lives very much. Even if their sect was destroyed, they might not necessarily be willing to risk their lives. Sect head Fang was, after all, the sect head of a sect. He also knew that with his status, it wouldn't be good for Yunwu sect to be destroyed, so he risked his life to resist. Now that sect head Fang was defeated and obviously wouldn't be spared, the Yunwu sect disciples in the square were all frightened and scared. Fang Dingyue, die in peace. Today our Wuxia sect will merge with the other three groups and from now on, will be the 8th Great Cultivation Group. Ah! Amidst the laughter, sect head Fang fell to the ground with a loud bang. A sorrowful and indignant shout came from the Yunwu sect disciples. Sect head Li turned his head. Ruthlessness flashed in his eyes as he waved his sleeve. Instantly that person screamed and fell to the ground. Mo Chinga turned her head and saw the foundation-building cultivator lying on the ground. His eyes were wide open as if he died with a grievance. There was a bloody hole in his body and blood was gurgling out. At this time she heard a mournful shout, "Father!" It was Wang Qian. The dead foundation-building cultivator was her father, Wang Qiao. Although Wang Qian had a foundation-building cultivator as her father, she never showed off. Usually she only said she was Wang Qiao's disciple. This was the first time she called him that in front of outsiders. Mo Chinga looked worriedly at sect head Li, who was still in the air. Fortunately, sect head Li didn't want to kill him since he saw he was just an aura-refining cultivator. Under this ruthlessness, none of the Yunwu sect disciples dared to move. Several foundation-building cultivators were trembling with fear. They didn't expect Li Mingzhang to be so cruel and merciless. Wang Qiao was killed right after he shouted. Sect head Li seemed very satisfied when he saw the silence below. He even smiled. Disciples, as you can see, Yunwu sect is removed from East Kunwo from now on. If you join Wuxia sect, you'll receive the same treatment as before, maybe even better. Otherwise... He glanced at the square and his gaze stopped on Wang Qiao's corpse. His meaning couldn't be more obvious. Under such a combination of carrots and carrots, Yunwu sect's aura-refining disciples and several foundation-building disciples didn't dare to move in the slightest. All of them acquiesced to this result. Sect leader Li grunted with satisfaction and turned to the disciples of Jindao School. You don't have to take any chances. Now that Jindao School leader can't move, you're at our mercy. Your Jindao School is the same as Yunwu sect. From today onwards you'll belong to my Wuxia sect. If there's anyone who doesn't accept, With Yunwu sect as an example, no one in Jindao School dared to make a move. Right now, Wuxia sect was really too powerful. Even if the two groups joined forces, it still wouldn't be enough to fight against them, let alone now that all the golden core cultivators were trapped by them. At this moment, several people flew out from the ruins of the main hall. Some were carrying, some were dead and some were alive. They were the core formation cultivators from Yunwu sect and Jindao school. Most of them were already dead. A few of them were still alive but they were still unconscious. She didn't know what method Wuxia sect used to catch so many core formation cultivators in one fell swoop. Sect leader Li turned around and said to someone, "Brother Jiang, this time it's all thanks to you. In the future, Wuxia sect's Mount Yunwu branch will depend on you." The person he called Brother Jiang was a man who seemed to be in his 30s. He wore a yellow robe and on his cuffs, there were several clouds embroidered. This was the symbol of Yunwu sect. The man looked very indifferent as he said, "How can I disobey the sect leader's order?" From his words, he already regarded sect leader Li as the head of the three groups. Sect leader Li seemed to be very satisfied with his answer and laughed. Obviously, this cultivator surnamed Jiang was Yunwu sect's spy. Mo Chenga didn't know what benefits Wuxia sect promised him to make him betray his own sect. Most core formation cultivators were proud and arrogant. If they didn't promise great benefits, they wouldn't bear such infamy. At this moment, there was a commotion in Jindao school's camp. A core formation cultivator carried a person over and threw him in front of sect leader Li. Mo Chenga focused her gaze and saw that it was actually Jindao school's school leader Jin. At this moment, sect leader Li was very complacent. He stared at the ashen-faced school leader Jin and said with a smile, "Brother Jin, considering our many years of friendship, I'll give you another chance. How about Jindao school submit to my Wuxia sect?" School leader Jin looked very angry. His whole body was in a sorry state. He turned to look at Jindao school's camp, then his gaze fell on the corpse on the side. After a long time he finally sighed dejectedly. "Do I have any other choice now? You're the knife and I'm the meat. I can only let Brother Li make the decision." His words clearly showed that he had accepted his fate. Although everyone knew this, it was different when the sect leader personally said it. The disciples of Jindao school immediately gave up. The overall situation was set. Jindao school no longer existed. Sect leader Li revealed a satisfied smile. He raised his head and gazed into the distance. "That'll do. Marshal Uncle Chen has given his order. Since these people have been subdued, it's time to deal with the remaining problems." Remaining problems? For a moment, Mo Chenga was puzzled. However, she saw sect leader Li give an order, leaving a core formation cultivator here. He then led everyone away, taking school leader Jin with him. It was only when their flight lights disappeared into the horizon that the aura refining disciples in the square heaved sighs of relief. The spiritual aura pressure from so many core formation cultivators was really hard for them to bear. As soon as they left, the disciples of Wuxia sect were already talking and laughing happily. They naturally didn't know about such an important matter beforehand. However, they were naturally happy to see their sect annexing the other two cultivation groups and becoming the biggest cultivation group in this area. In contrast, the disciples of Yunwu sect and Jindao school were all dispirited and anxious. Although sect leader Li wanted them to submit and not kill them, they were the ones who were annexed after all. Who knew what would happen in the future? Besides, most of them were disciples of cultivation clans attached to Yunwu sect. They didn't know whether their clans would suffer a calamity because of this. If they did, their clans would be exterminated. The only remaining core formation cultivator was currently sitting cross-legged in the center of the square. Perhaps because the noise was too loud, he opened his eyes and shouted, "My sect's disciples can leave, but the disciples of Yunwu sect and Jindao school are not allowed to leave even half a step." Once he said that, the square immediately became quiet. The disciples of Wuxia sect lowered their heads and left one after another. The disciples of the other two cultivation groups didn't dare to make any noise. Seeing that all the disciples of Wuxia sect had left in just a moment, the core formation cultivator once again closed his eyes and meditated. After a long time, seeing that the core formation cultivator wasn't paying any attention to them, the disciples of the two cultivation groups went to look for their relatives and friends to discuss the matter in low voices. Upon seeing this, Mo Chenga also quietly went to Wang Chen's place. Since Wang Qiao's death, Wang Chenyi had been holding her father's corpse, sitting on the ground in a daze while shedding tears. It seemed like she couldn't accept what had happened. Shen Bing and Murong Yen were already by her side. The two of them tried to persuade her in low voices, but their hearts were also burning with anxiety. The two of them were also disciples of cultivation clans, and they even had masters. Faced with this kind of unforeseen event, they were afraid their clans and masters would be implicated. Mo Qianga first saluted Xin Bing and Murong Yen when she arrived by their side. She then advised Wang Qinyi in a low voice, "Senior Martial Sister Wang, now isn't the time to be sad. Martial Uncle Wang has passed away, so the rest of the matters will have to depend on you. You have to keep your spirits up." Wang Qinyi's gaze wavered. Mo Qianga hastily said, "We still have to rely on Senior Martial Sister Wang to take care of your mother and the people of Wang clan, lest they get involved in this matter." Wang Qinyi took a deep breath, wiped her tears and looked at Mo Qianga. "Thank you for the reminder, Junior Martial Brother Yi. I'll persevere." Mo Qianga nodded lightly, then no longer said anything to them. Although she was familiar with Wang Qinyi, their friendship hadn't reached the point where they could advance or retreat together. Before the matter was clear, it was better for them not to have too many interactions. Mo Qianga raised her head, wanting to look for Lu Yidao and the others, but she saw Jiang Shanghang first. Jiang Shanghang's expression was unsightly and looked increasingly gloomy for some unknown reason. Chapter 60. Before long they found Su Jingji. When Mo Qianga approached him, she discovered that his expression was also very unsightly. She pulled his sleeve to draw his attention back to her. "Junior Martial Brother Yi?" Su Jingji trembled slightly. How could this be? How could Mo Qianga answer this question? She could only comfort him. "Senior Martial Brother Su, don't worry. I think they just want to annex the other two groups. As long as it's not necessary, they won't kill anyone." Su Jingji shook his head. How could it be that easy to annex other cultivation groups? The 3 cultivation groups have been established here for several thousand years. It's not like there hasn't been a situation where one of them was especially powerful, but they've always lived in harmony. Every cultivation group has a complicated relationship. It's easy to oppress them with force, but it's not easy to completely control them. I have a feeling that if Xisha sect makes a move, blood will flow like a river. Mo Qianga was speechless. She didn't really understand the matters of cultivation groups and clans, so what Su Jingji said sounded very reasonable. He turned around and saw that Qin had come looking for him. Junior Martial Brothers. Although his expression was calm, it was much graver than usual. Senior Martial Brother Qin. Mo Qianga turned to look at him. "Have you seen Senior Martial Brother Lu?" Qin shook his head. "I don't know where Senior Martial Brother Lu is. I only saw you two." He paused for a moment, then said, "But I saw Senior Martial Brother Jiang, and his complexion looked very bad." Su Jingji snorted coldly. Of course his expression wasn't good. It was their Jiang clan who betrayed Yunwu sect. Both Mo Qianga and Qin were stunned. Jiang clan? The core formation cultivator who acted as a spy just now was indeed called Brother Jiang. So that's Jiang clan's core formation grandmaster. Qin nodded slightly. It seems Senior Martial Brother Jiang also feels bad. What's there to be unhappy about? Su Jingji sneered. This time their Jiang clan has gotten what they wanted. In order to seize the sect's power, they didn't hesitate to become someone else's grandson. Mo Qianga and Qin glanced at each other but didn't answer. Everyone knew that Jiang Shanghang and Jiang clan weren't on good terms. Besides, the clan's aura-refining disciples basically didn't know about this kind of matter. Most likely, when Jiang Shanghang found out about it, his mood would be far more complicated than others. Qin pondered for a moment, then said, "Aside from waiting, there's no other way. Junior Apprentice Brother Su, raise your spirits. If there are any changes, it'll be easier to deal with them." How could Su Jingji not know? He just felt restless when he thought about his family and Yunwu sect. The 3 of them found a corner and slowly waited. After a night, a streak of light finally flashed across the horizon. This streak of light landed on the square. It was a core formation cultivator. After exchanging a few words with the guards, the man walked towards the Yunwu sect disciples and said, "All disciples, follow me back to Yunwu sect. You're not allowed to disobey my order." Mo Qianga and the other 2 looked hesitant when they heard what he said. Su Jingji whispered, "Could it be?" Both of them could guess what he wanted to say. Now that they were called back, it could only mean that the matter had been settled. It was unknown what they had done in order to seize power in the sect. Qin remained calm and said, "We'll know once we go back and take a look." Mo Qianga nodded. "Yes. Senior Brother Su, let's go back first." Su Jingji nodded with a pale face. Several hundred Yunwu sect disciples boarded this core formation cultivator's flying magic weapon. When they came, they were restless because they were excited. Now that they were going back, they were still restless because they were frightened. Although Mo Qianga wasn't as worried as Su Jingji, she was also afraid they might hurt innocent people during the fight. If the fight of magical powers between core formation cultivators destroyed Mount Yunwu's market square, second uncle would be in danger. His heart was burning with anxiety, and the journey of a few hours was especially long. After an unknown amount of time, the gate of Mount Yunwu finally appeared below. When they landed on Yunwu Sect's square, the core formation cultivator shouted, "All disciples return to your immortals' caves. Don't go out at will." Naturally, no one dared to question him. The Yunwu sect disciples lowered their heads and left one after another. Even if they were worried about their family, they didn't dare to say anything. Mo Qianga glanced at the foot of the mountain. Everything seemed calm and there were no signs of fighting. Second uncle should be safe, right? When they returned to their residence, everyone didn't even have the mood to talk. They just sat in the small living room in a daze. Even Jiang Shanghong didn't return to his room. Like them, he was staring at the gate in a daze. They didn't know where Louis Dao had gone. Even now there was no trace of him. The longer Su Jingji waited, the more anxious he became. He stood up and started walking in circles in the living room. Jiang Shanghong finally slammed the teacup in his hand on the table with a loud bang and said in a rough voice, "Stop walking." This sentence gave Su Jingji a breakthrough in his depressed mood. He immediately stood still. His eyes seemed to be spitting fire. After a long time, he finally straightened his neck and said, "What did you say?" Jiang Shanghong said in a muffled voice, "You're making me dizzy." Su Jingji paused for a while, then suddenly took a step forward. He gnashed his teeth and said, "You still dare to talk? It's all your Jiang clan's fault. As elders of Yunwu sect, you actually colluded with outsiders. You still have the face to talk?" Jiang Shanghong's complexion turned pale, but in the next second he stood up with a flushed face. "What does it have to do with me? What kind of people do you think the others are? It's your Su clan. It's just that you don't have the ability. Otherwise, who knows who would have betrayed you? You." Su Jingji's expression changed greatly. He rushed forward, grabbed Jiang Shanghong's collar and was about to punch him. How could Jiang Shanghong be willing to show weakness? Without saying a word, the two of them started to fight. Mo Qianga's mind was in a mess, but seeing them like this, she had no choice but to stop them. However, she still had misgivings and didn't dare to have too much contact with them. Since she couldn't pull them away, she could only cast a pleading gaze towards Qin Shi, who was still sitting motionlessly. Qin Shi shook his head at her. Mo Qianga didn't understand. What does he mean? Don't care? Qin Shi sighed and pointed at the seat next to him. He waited until she hesitantly came over and sat down before he said, "The two of them are in a bad mood. It's good for them to vent their feelings by fighting. Don't worry. You see, they aren't using any spiritual aura, so they can't hurt anyone." "Really?" She turned around and saw that the two of them had finally gotten into a tussle. They were punching and kicking like mortals in the secular world, completely disorderly. After a long time, the two of them were tired and finally stopped. However, both of them were badly battered and gasping for breath. Mo Qianga sighed and helped Su Jingji up. "Senior Martial Brother Su, I won't help you treat your injuries. You should look at yourself in the mirror." Su Jingji sat on a chair and smiled bitterly. "Junior Martial Brother Yi, you're still telling jokes at this time? What can I do if I don't tell jokes?" Mo Qianga stared at the tranquil scene outside the room. "We can't do anything." Right at that moment, someone hurriedly walked into the courtyard. Su Jingji was pleasantly surprised. "It's Senior Martial Brother Lu." Everyone crowded around him. Louis Dao was startled the moment he entered the room. Su Jingji couldn't help but ask, "Senior Martial Brother Lu, what happened? Where did you go?" Louis Dao looked at them and smiled bitterly. "I was left behind in Zixia sect and just came back." He saw the bruises on Su Jingji's and Jiang Shanghong's faces. "Junior Martial Brothers, what happened?" Qin Shi said, "Senior Martial Brother Lu, you don't need to worry. They're just having an argument. I wonder if Senior Martial Brother saw the situation outside when you came back?" Louis Dao looked at the two of them hesitantly and answered, "Junior Martial Brothers, you don't need to worry. There's no big change in the sect. However, in the next few days we'd better not go out. I heard they're going to carry out a purge of Yunwu sect's forces. We'd better not get involved." "Is that so?" Su Jingji smiled bitterly. "I wonder how my family is. If there's nothing going on, they should have sent us a message." Louis Dao comforted him. "Junior Martial Brother Su, don't worry. Cultivation clans are the foundation of cultivation groups. As long as your family doesn't resist, nothing will happen. Although he said that, Su Jingji still couldn't help but worry. Although Jiang Shanghong wasn't worried about his family, his mood became even worse when he heard this news. Without saying a word, he went back to his room and slammed the door with a loud bang. Mo Chenga stared outside the room with a heavy heart. Sure enough, they're going to carry out a purge? It seemed that under this tranquility Yunwu sect was really going to be bathed in blood. Chapter 61. Several days later, Yunwu sect officially changed its name to Zixia sect's Mount Yunwu branch. As soon as she regained her freedom, Mo Chenga went down the mountain to see if second uncle was doing well and then told him about this matter. In the past few days Yi Jiang had already understood everything. He only said to her, just concentrate on cultivating. You don't need to care about this kind of thing. As long as you can build your foundation, it doesn't matter which cultivation group you're in. In all fairness, Mo Chenga didn't have any feelings for cultivation groups. In the past 10 years, it was second uncle who took her to wander around, devoted himself to raising her. Yunwu sect didn't do anything for her, and she didn't have too many feelings for Yunwu sect either. In the entire celestial pole or in the entire cultivation world, most people were this practical. Now that she was in the 10th layer of the aura refining realm, she could already abstain from eating, so she simply stayed in her room to stabilize her cultivation level and study formations. She hadn't had time to study the Chimen Duanjia she obtained in Miwu Valley 2 years ago. Now was the perfect time to carefully study it. During the time she stayed in her room, the influence of the annexation of the sect became greater and greater. Zixia sect sent several core formation cultivators to take over. Now there was no sect head of Yunwu sect, only the master of Mount Yunwu, and the master of this branch was precisely the core formation cultivator from Jiang clan. Of course, this didn't have much to do with Jiang Shanghong. He wasn't close to his sect and had a grudge against Jiang Chengxian. It was already good enough that he wasn't bullied, so how could he enjoy any special treatment? Apart from Jiang clan, none of the other core formation cultivators escaped this calamity. Even their clans were implicated. Moreover, most of the sect's disciples came from cultivation clans. Because of threats and promises, disciples died every day because of this, causing everyone to live in fear every day. Normally, the individual cultivators who entered the sect through the Immortals' assembly shouldn't be affected too much, but several disciples were implicated and died. Fortunately, Su Jingji wasn't among them. Later, Mo Chenga heard that Wang Qinyi married a junior of a core formation cultivator from Zixia sect and went to Zixia sect. Because of this, Wang clan was spared and was no longer investigated. Mo Chenga could only sigh about this. As a woman, her body was her last asset. Senior Marshal Sister Wang was a proud woman. Although her father was a foundation-building cultivator, she was never proud and always treated others kindly. But in the end she couldn't protect herself. Mo Chenga recalled when she ran into Shin Bing and Mo Chenga in Miwu Valley. Mo Chenga mentioned that she was verbally harassed by Shin Bing. Although Shin Bing was angry she tolerated it, but Mo Chenga cursed at her. Mo Chenga also recalled that today she was forced to marry the hedonistic son of a rich family she despised the most. She really had no control over her own fate. After a while, she heard that Shin Bing was forced to become sect head Li's son's concubine. Senior sister Shin Bing had always been famous for her beauty in the 3 sections. Many of the disciples of the 3 sects had fallen under her skirt. She was not surprised at all that she had fallen into such a situation. Beauty was wealth, but it was also a curse. If she hadn't disguised herself as a man and stopped showing her womanly side, she probably wouldn't have had a good ending today. Later. Yan's Mo Li's sect, Sec's Yen's sect, Yen as Mo Xia sect's Lizi cities well as she could. Mo as she said Mu's Mu. Qing Mu is Qing Mu. Apart from replying with a blessing summoning amulet, there was nothing else she could do. Several months later, the storm of annexing the 2 sects gradually subsided. When Mo Chenga came out of her room and saw the 3 of them in the small living room, she couldn't help but feel a bit surprised. What's going on? Louis Dao beckoned her over. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, come over and let's have a chat. Filled with questions, he walked over and found a chair to sit on. Mo Chenga really didn't believe she was fine. Louis Dao and Su Jingji were extroverted, so it was normal for them to gather and chat when they had nothing to do. However, she never left his room unless he had something to do. The reason he stayed outside was either because he had something to do or because he was interested in a topic. Louis Dao excitedly asked, Junior Marshal Brother Yi, you still don't know about the news that just came out, right? What news? Louis Dao mysteriously paused for a moment before continuing, news about foundation building pills. Mo Chinga almost forgot about this matter. After the sect's extermination, she also forgot about the minor competition that was supposed to be held several months ago. What's wrong? Are they going to hold the minor competition again? Louis Dao shook his head, feeling extremely excited. I heard that in order to appease the sect's disciples, they're going to increase the distribution of foundation-building pills and change the method of distribution. Method? What method? Are we not going to hold the minor competition anymore? Louis Dao nodded. Yes, the minor competition this time is cancelled. Mo Chinga didn't understand. Then what method are they going to use? Su Jingji, who had been silent the whole time, coldly snorted and said, Isn't it because too many people died this time? If we hold the minor competition, it'll be too cold and cheerless, so they're changing the method. Su Jingji's mood had always been bad. Although their Su clan wasn't implicated, they weren't having a good time either. Su Jingji originally had an uncle in the foundation building realm, but because he was close to sect head Fong, he was demoted back to the clan. Fortunately, he expressed his stance quickly so he didn't implicate other people. Coupled with Xin Bing's and Wang Chenyi's experiences, Su Jingji, who was also a descendant of a cultivation clan, was filled with hatred. Upon seeing his reaction, Qin Shi coughed and said, Junior Marshal Brother Su, it's better for you to calm down a bit. No matter what happened in the past, Zixia sect is hanging over our heads now. Su Jingji's expression stiffened, but in the end he still agreed. How could he not know this? However, his life had been smooth ever since he was a child. Aside from the Immortals' Assembly, he had never encountered such a depressing matter, so he didn't hide his emotions. Louis Dao felt very embarrassed after being interrupted. Su Jingji's mood wasn't right, yet he was so excited. He immediately restrained his emotions and said, I heard the demonic beasts in the depths of Kunwu mountain range are getting restless again, and the small demonic beasts in the vicinity are also frequently injuring people. Therefore, the sect has decided to reward us according to the number of demonic beasts we catch in Mount Yunwu within a day. The first few dozen disciples will be qualified to receive foundation-building pills. Is that so? Mo Chinga frowned. In the depths of the south of Kunwu was a dense forest that stretched as far as the eye could see. Reportedly, there were many high-level demonic beasts there, but in the vicinity of the sect, there were generally only first and second-rank demonic beasts. The first rank was equivalent to the aura refining realm, while the second rank was equivalent to the early stage of the foundation building realm. As long as aura refining disciples were careful, they could deal with first-rank demonic beasts. As for second-rank demonic beast, although it was a bit difficult, demonic beasts didn't know how to use talismans and didn't know many spells, so they could still be killed if many people ganged up on them. Even if they couldn't kill them, they could still run away. However, although this method sounded good, it wasn't like the minor competition where even if they were strong enough, one of them would meet a tragic end if they met a similar opponent. But after careful consideration, it was actually a preferential treatment for cultivation clans because they had a lot of manpower. When the time came, they could concentrate on one person and obtain a foundation-building pill. As for the other disciples who would be willing to sacrifice themselves for others. After all, if there were spoils of war, there would be rewards. Can we go together? Louis Dao shook his head. This time we won't be competing in Miwu Valley. Disciples will be competing with each other. Of course, if we run into each other inside, we'll presumably be allowed to move together. However, the chances of that happening are really low. The mountain forest is too big. Mo Chinga was calculating in her heart. This method had both advantages and disadvantages. The advantage was that she didn't need to be afraid of being seen by others, so she could just use whatever methods she had. The disadvantage was that she had to be extra careful. After all, if she wasn't careful when fighting demonic beasts, she might end up dying in their mouths. Chapter 62. The vast forest stretched as far as the eye could see. It was verdant and lush, stretching for thousands of miles. Mo Chinga stood on top of a high cliff, silently watching. This was the southern end of Kunwu mountain range, a part of the forest. Countless demonic beasts lived here. Some were tamed by cultivators and became spiritual beasts, but most of them lived freely in this forest, cultivating and taking human forms. It was said that in the innermost part of the forest, near the sea, lived many demonic beasts that had already taken human forms. They generally didn't go out of the forest, but every once in a while, they couldn't help but want to order low-level demonic beasts to attack and occupy the areas where human cultivators lived. Of course, they couldn't occupy those areas under normal circumstances. However, they could obtain a lot of medicinal pills to help their cultivation every time they came here, so they were very happy. Every time this happened, it was a gamble. Sometimes the human cultivators suffered heavy losses, but sometimes they obtained a lot of good demonic beast corpses to be used as tool refining materials. Emo Chinga had never encountered this kind of situation. She was only a low-level cultivator and had only been in Kunwo for 10 years. The last time she fought against demonic beasts was at least 50 or 60 years ago. Standing on this high cliff with her were a core formation cultivator, more than 10 foundation building cultivators, and several hundred aura refining cultivators. The consequences of Wuxia sect annexing Yunwu sect could already be seen. In the last minor competition, Yunwu sect had more than 400 disciples in the 7th layer or above, but now there were probably less than 300, maybe even fewer. Among these cultivators, Mo Chenga didn't see many familiar figures. Senior Martial Brother Zhou didn't come because, with his cultivation level in the 11th layer of the aura refining realm, he would definitely get a share of the foundation building pills. Since the sect had just suffered a disaster, he didn't want to attract attention, so he simply didn't participate. Wang Qianyi and Shen Bing also didn't come. The two of them went to Wuxia sect's main branch, and it was said that they had already decided to get a share of the foundation building pills. Because of this, Mo Chenga felt a little better. At least the two of them weren't making unnecessary sacrifices. Murong Yin, on the other hand, came. She looked pale and skinny standing alone in the crowd. Her face was expressionless, and her original beauty was completely gone. Seeing her appearance, Mo Chenga sighed in her heart. This was also good. At least she wouldn't follow in Wang Qianyi and Shen Bing's footsteps. Not long after, another group of people flew over from the horizon and landed on this flat cliff. They were Jindao School's disciples. Just like Yunwu sect, although they didn't change the color of their clothes, they added the symbol of Wuxia sect. At a rough glance, there were only about 100 Jindao School disciples. Apparently they had also gone through a purge. Everyone had a distracted expression on their faces. Fighting over foundation building pills was something like that, yet none of them looked excited. Obviously, what they saw was even more miserable than what Yunwu sect's disciples experienced. The core formation cultivator leading them was a Taoist priest dressed in secular clothes. Because of this, Mo Chenga stared at him a few more times. Although the righteous cultivators in the immortal cultivation world all practiced Tao techniques, many of them dressed as Taoists, which was different from the secular world. Most of the Taoists in the secular world wore cyan or dark blue buttoned robes, which were thick and heavy without any sense of hierarchy. Taoist robes in the cultivation world, on the other hand, were mostly beautified. Dark blue robes, buttoned robes, and plain robes were layered with innate trigrams and taiji cloud patterns. Their colors were also distinguished, making them look elegant yet dignified. Compared to the Taoists in the secular world, Taoists appeared even more elegant and graceful. Therefore, they rarely wore secular Taoist robes because they couldn't show the temperament of cultivators. The Taoist in front of her was obviously a core formation cultivator, but he didn't care about what he wore at all. It was obvious that he had a firm Tao heart. Once this person arrived, the current branch master of Yunwu Mountain greeted him enthusiastically. "Senior Martial Brother Lin, long time no see." This Taoist didn't give him any face. He only let out a soft humph, then closed his eyes to rest. Branch Master Jiang was snubbed, so he looked a little embarrassed. Mo Chenga saw that some of the Yunwu sect disciples, such as Su Jingji, were secretly pleased. Jiang Shanghong, on the other hand, looked annoyed. It seemed he couldn't bear to see his elder's behavior. He stared at a cultivator next to Branch Master Jiang, hatred flashing across his face. Mo Chenga realized that person was Jiang Chengxian, a disciple of Jiang clan who once bullied her. This Jiang Chengxian seemed to be Branch Master Jiang's direct descendant. He always followed Branch Master Jiang, and there was a complacent expression on his face. Although Mo Chenga wasn't close to Jiang Shanghong, upon seeing this scene, she still somewhat despised Jiang Chengxian. He was a hedonistic son of a rich family who relied on his blood relationship with his elder to commit outrages. He didn't concentrate on cultivating and didn't have any real skills. It was no wonder Jiang Shanghong didn't like him. After a while, another group of people flew over from the horizon. The number of people was much more than the number of their two groups. They were Wuxia sect's disciples. The cultivator who led Wuxia sect's group was rather good-natured. He was also indifferent to Branch Master Jiang, but he was very polite to that Taoist. After the three of them talked for a while, they each used their magic weapons. In an instant, a transporting formation appeared out of thin air. It seemed to be the same technique as the one in Miwu Valley. Presumably, it had been used to test the disciples before. All disciples go in one by one. No pushing. After experiencing the calamity that befell their sect, the disciples of Yunwu sect and Jindao school were naturally quiet. On the other hand, Zixia sect's disciples were beaming with joy and rushed to go in first. The disciples of the other two groups also didn't care and just waited. Mo Chenga looked left and right. Among her fellow martial brothers, Lu Yidao was itching to try, Su Jingji had a calm expression, Qin Shi still had a calm expression, and Jiang Shanghong had a deep frown on his face. She touched her face and felt that it was a bit stiff, so she slowed down her breathing and adjusted her mentality. She was determined to obtain the foundation-building pill. In the future, if she couldn't stand Zixia sect's way of doing things, she could find an excuse to leave the mountain and never come back. Zixia sect didn't have time to care about a low-level disciple. Before that, it would be best if she could obtain the foundation-building pill in the sect and build her foundation. Otherwise, with only her aura refining cultivation level and second uncle's lifespan approaching its end, she wouldn't dare to casually leave. As her imagination ran wild, she suddenly noticed that Su Jingji, who was the closest to her, seemed to be trembling. Mo Chenga called out in a low voice, "Senior Marshal Brother Su?" Su Jingji turned his head. His face was so pale that he was sweating profusely. His voice was also trembling slightly. "In?" Mo Chenga sighed. "We haven't gone in yet. Don't collapse." Upon hearing what she said, Su Jingji hastily wiped his sweat and pretended that nothing had happened. "Junior Marshal Brother Yi doesn't need to worry." "Even if I worry, I won't be able to," Mo Chenga said. "You have to be alert. This forest is very dangerous and we can't travel together." Su Jingji nodded. After a long time he seemed to still be in a bad mood. He whispered to her, "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, I'm really worried. Our three groups obviously have a grudge against each other. If we go into the forest like this, won't there be some kind of conflict?" Mo Chenga was puzzled. "Why?" Su Jingji was silent for a long time. All of a sudden he said through clenched teeth, "If I run into that Jiang Chengxian, if I can clean him up, I'll—" A fierce look flashed across his face. She knew what he meant. Mo Chenga was startled. She turned her head around and saw that no one was paying attention to them. She then said in a low voice, "Senior Marshal Brother Su, you mustn't talk nonsense. You're too nervous." Su Jingji closed his eyes and nodded. He then wiped the sweat on his face and said, "Junior Marshal Brother Yi is right." Right after he said that, he closed his eyes to rest, adjusting his breath and calming his mind. Mo Chenga pondered for a moment, then took out something from inside her robe and handed it to him. "Senior Marshal Brother Su, this is a heart-calming talisman. If you can't control yourself, just stick it on your body." Su Jingji opened his eyes. Without saying anything, he accepted the talisman and said, "Thank you, Junior Marshal Brother Yi." Mo Chenga smiled. She no longer said anything and just stared at the transporting formation. In just a short while, almost all the Zixia sect disciples had left. She composed herself, then walked towards the transporting formation. Chapter 63. The transporting formation shone brightly. Without any hesitation, Mo Chenga slapped a defensive talisman on her body. This time it was different from Miwu Valley. No matter what, Miwu Valley had been dealt with by the seniors of the three sections. Although there were still demonic beasts, there were only a few left. Moreover, there were some restrictions set up in the valley. As long as the disciples had the medallions, they wouldn't die. But in this forest it was hard to say. If they really teleported to the front of the demonic beasts and got bitten, it would be fatal. Moreover, there was a turbulent undercurrent between the disciples of the three sections. In addition, there were some people who would forget what was right for the sake of profit. They might really lose their lives. Because she'd long anticipated that this trip would definitely be dangerous, she deliberately used some things to exchange with Qin Shi for some talismans. A while ago, Qin Shi had been practicing drawing talismans. Although he lost a lot of his talismans, he also made quite a few finished ones. Since he didn't like them, he said he had a lot left, so the other three people exchanged a lot of talismans with him. Mo Chenga didn't have many spirit stones left, so she used some materials to exchange with him. He didn't really care because he dabbled in both pill concocting and tool refining, so he accepted everything she offered. Mo Chenga was somewhat worried about preparing for the trial this time. She wasn't a wealthy cultivator, and all the spirit stones she needed for cultivation were obtained through rewards or transactions. Unfortunately, she didn't have a good aptitude, so the amount of spirit stones she needed to cultivate was quite a lot. It turned out that second uncle had sold his own belongings to prepare talismans and pills for her during the minor competition of the 3 sects. She really didn't have any other belongings. There were only about 100 or so spirit stones left, which were reserved for laying formations. There were also some spiritual plants, spiritual objects and other materials, but most of them had already been exchanged for spirit stones, so the remaining ones couldn't be sold for much money. There were also too few talismans, so they couldn't be exchanged for spirit stones. In addition, there were a bunch of unknown things. Some of them were recognized by Qin Shi, so he exchanged them for talismans. As for the rest, he didn't know what they were. She remembered that she had obtained a bead from the man of the Yin clan. It was about the size of a child's fist. She could feel the surging spiritual qi in it, but no one could recognize what it was. In this way, only the spiritual weapons were still valuable. Most of them were obtained from the man from the Yin clan 3 years ago, so she didn't dare to sell them. However, this wasn't something she needed to worry about right now. At the very least, she had made sufficient preparations for this test. Once she was transported into the forest, Mo Chenga immediately looked around. Fortunately, he didn't encounter any demonic beasts. She heaved a sigh of relief and took a step forward. The next moment, she missed her footing and fell straight down. She hurriedly used the light body technique, found a foothold and leaped up. This was a steep slope. Because there were too many vines, it looked like solid ground in front, but it was actually just vines attached to it. She slapped her forehead. It was really a false alarm. She had observed the surroundings but had forgotten to look under her feet. It seemed that she would have to pay more attention in the future. He was surrounded by dense trees and vines that crawled everywhere. Beneath his feet was a thick layer of dried leaves. It was very difficult to find a path. From inside her robe, Mo Chenga took out a jade slip engraved with a map of this place. However, this map was too rough, and there was no reference nearby, so she simply couldn't find it. She could only give up. She carefully restrained her breath, took out her greenwood sword and walked through the forest. There was an advantage to being here, and that was that she cultivated a wood-attributed cultivation technique. In this forest, the wood qi was dense, and the power of her cultivation technique would be even greater. Suddenly, she felt a spiritual aura movement behind her. Mo Chenga, who had been observing her surroundings attentively, immediately moved. She blocked with her greenwood sword and turned around to see her opponent. It was actually a brightly colored flat-headed demonic snake. In an instant, her hair stood on end. Even though she considered herself bold, she really wanted to vomit when facing such a snake. But now wasn't the time to vomit. This demonic snake's breath wasn't weak. If she didn't concentrate and died under its mouth, it would be even more disgusting. This snake was more than 10 feet long, as thick as the mouth of a bowl, with a flat head and a thin tongue. Its cold and gloomy eyes were directly staring at her. Judging from the breath it emitted, it was a first-rank demonic beast. In an instant, the snake jumped up and spat black venom towards her. At this time, the defensive talisman on her body took effect. The venom fell off before it could touch her body. After this attack, the defensive barrier on her body shook and was about to break. Mo Chenga didn't dare to be careless, so she took out another defensive talisman and slapped it on her body. Then she took out her greenwood sword and attacked the snake's weak point. This demonic snake was very agile. It moved as fast as lightning. As it stretched and shrank, it tangled with greenwood sword. Mo Chenga carefully controlled greenwood sword while taking out a handful of seeds from her Chenkuan bag. Taking advantage of the fact that the snake was tangled with greenwood sword, she threw them out. The seeds fell on the snake's body. One by one they grew into fire thorns, firmly entangling the demonic snake. She calmed down a little, but in the next second she was so surprised that she almost shouted. The demonic snake stretched and shrank its body. The fire thorns entangling its body couldn't pierce its skin at all. Instead, it swung its tail and sent the thorns flying. Mo Chenga's expression turned grave. The scales on this snake's skin were unexpectedly so hard that the thorns of the fire thorns couldn't pierce through. The demonic snake dodged greenwood sword and suddenly turned its head towards her. The tip of its tongue spat out wasn't venom but fog. Mo Chenga felt dizzy. She was shocked. This must be poisonous fog. She didn't dare to be careless. While holding her breath, she took out a medicinal pill from her Chenkuan bag and threw it into her mouth. As the medicinal power of the refreshing pill spread, her mind immediately became clear. She didn't dare to continue entangling with the snake, so she took out a talisman and threw it at the snake's body. A pillar of water soared into the sky and poured on the snake's body. Soon after, it froze into ice, and the demonic snake's body immediately slowed down. Greenwood sword stabbed down. With a pu sound, the sword finally pierced through its scales and firmly nailed it 7 inches from its head. The demonic snake twisted a few times, but it couldn't break free from the ice or the greenwood sword. In the end it stopped breathing and stopped moving. Emo Chenga heaved a sigh of relief. She retrieved her greenwood sword and carefully wiped it clean. She regretfully looked at the ice on the demonic snake's body. This freezing talisman wasn't cheap. This forest was really dangerous everywhere. It was only a snake, but it actually put her in such a dangerous situation and even made her use an freezing talisman. Facing the snake's corpse on the ground, Emo Chenga was in a dilemma. During this trial, the elders of the school clearly told her to bring back the demonic beast's corpse. However, this snake looked really disgusting, so she couldn't do anything about it. After hesitating for a while, she took out a leather pouch from her chinkuan bag. With a flick of her greenwood sword, she picked up the snake's corpse, fastened the mouth of the pouch, and threw it into her chinkuan bag. Once she finished doing all this, she once again restrained her breath, carefully identified her direction and went out of this forest. In the dense forest, a clear brook flowed through an open space in the forest, meandering downwards. Under the nourishment of this brook, the grassland on both sides was lush and the wildflowers were brilliant. It was indeed a beautiful scene in the wilderness. However, in this beautiful scene there were 2 people who ruined it. One of them was wearing purple robes and the other was wearing yellow robes. Their cuffs were embroidered with the same symbol. The 2 of them fiercely glared at each other. The purple-robed youth snorted and said angrily, "Jingdao School's disciple, you actually dared to mount a sneak attack on me?" The yellow-robed middle-aged cultivator's expression didn't change. He said faintly, "Yellow-haired brat, so what if I mount a sneak attack on you?" Angered by his unmoved attitude, the youth's face twisted. I'm a disciple of Wuxia sect's main branch. Aren't you afraid of being punished by your school?" The middle-aged cultivator smiled faintly. "If I did everything cleanly, who would be able to trace it back to me? You." The youth was seething with anger. Presumably, he didn't have enough experience and hadn't experienced any setbacks in his cultivation, so he was easily provoked. He immediately manipulated the spirit tool in his hand and rushed towards the middle-aged cultivator. The middle-aged cultivator cautiously took a step back. While manipulating the spirit tool, he secretly took out a talisman. Both of them were in the 10th layer. For a moment they were evenly matched as they fought back and forth. Right at this moment, another person came out of the forest. This time he was wearing black robes. When he saw the 2 people fighting, his expression changed. After a long time, he finally took out an object from his chinkuan bag and threw it towards one of them. Following the sound of the brook, several spiritual aura fluctuations attracted her attention. She carefully hid her tracks and walked towards the place where the fight was taking place. On the meadow beside the brook, 2 disciples from Wuxia sect and Jingdao school were fighting. In the corner of the forest, a Yunwu sect disciple with a ferocious expression threw the spirit tool in his hand. "Ah!" With a blood-curdling scream, that Wuxia sect disciple lay in a pool of blood, no longer breathing. The disciples of Jingdao school and Yunwu sect both heaved sighs of relief. The 2 of them didn't fight or talk. They just divided the Wuxia sect disciple's belongings, burned his corpse with a fire, and then went their separate ways. Emo Chenga hid herself in the forest, drenched in cold sweat. What Su Jingji was worried about finally happened. The disciples of Jingdao school and Yunwu sect, who harbored hatred in their hearts, killed the lone Wuxia sect disciple to vent their hatred. She could imagine what would happen next. Those who killed Wuxia sect disciples couldn't help but attack again. If they attacked too many times, Wuxia sect disciples would discover that their fellow disciples were killed. In their anger they would retaliate against the 2 groups. The disciples of the 3 groups would then fight each other, resulting in countless casualties. This trial was indeed full of dangers. Not only did she have to guard against the demonic beasts in the forest, but she also had to worry about other cultivators. After spending a long time to calm down, Emo Chenga once again set foot on the road. Even if she was worried, it was useless. She could only carefully avoid them because the formation at the exit would only open after 1 day, and she was determined to obtain the foundation building pill. Chapter 64. Once she found the stream, Mo Chinga could finally distinguish her position on the map. Then, in order to deliberately avoid others, she carefully studied her route. Fortunately, the information stated roughly what was in each place, and each disciple had a copy of the map. By finding a place that no one liked, she could naturally avoid most people. If someone was unlucky enough to be teleported to that place, he or she would probably leave. The place she found was dangerous in the eyes of ordinary people. There were cliffs, abysses, and a poisonous spring that emitted poisonous fog all year round. The map indicated that this place wasn't good. It wasn't easy to walk and there weren't any demonic beasts that were easy to kill. However, there were some demonic monkeys that lived in groups which were quite troublesome. Mo Chinga thought about it. It wasn't easy to walk, so she just had to be careful. After all, she wasn't an ordinary person, so she wouldn't encounter any accidents. As for those demonic monkeys that lived in groups, they were suitable for her. She was good at formations and first-rank demonic beasts couldn't recognize them. She just needed to find a suitable place to lay a disorienting formation and lure the monkeys inside. Then she wouldn't be afraid no matter how many monkeys there were. After making up her mind, she walked smoothly. Although her breath-concealing technique wasn't brilliant, the divine sense of an aura-refining cultivator wasn't strong, so very few people could detect her. Soon she arrived at the place indicated on the map. Mo Chinga took a look and unconsciously frowned. This place was indeed as the information said. It was a disgusting place. Probably because of the poisonous spring, there was poisonous fog as soon as she approached. The shrubs were so dense that there wasn't even a path and most of them were poisonous. It was obviously daytime, but this place was gray and overcast. She couldn't see the sky at all. Without a better choice, Mo Chinga could only brace herself and go. After sweeping this area with her divine sense, she had a general understanding of the terrain and also found the position of the demonic monkeys. There were many faint spiritual aura fluctuations on the edge of the poisonous spring. The divine sense of an aura-refining cultivator wasn't strong, so it was difficult to sense the spiritual aura fluctuations of a single low-rank demonic beast. However, when they gathered together, it was very easy to distinguish them. She swallowed a refreshing pill to prevent the poisonous fog from affecting her. Then, she laid a simple disorienting formation and a spirit-trapping formation in a place that wasn't too far from her. As its name suggested, the spirit-trapping formation's main function was to make people lose their way. Once they entered the formation, they would keep walking in circles and couldn't get out. The spirit-trapping formation's purpose was to deal with people or beasts with spiritual aura. Once they entered the formation, their spiritual aura would run slower. Generally, this formation would be placed in cultivators' caves to prevent others from breaking in. These two formations were not enough. After thinking for a while, she set up another 5 elements life and death formation. This formation was more troublesome than the previous two, but she had been studying the formation book some time ago and had modified this formation. It could be used for both offense and defense, so it was safer to use it. After MOG's spiritual aura state, she adjusted it, A she to defend and attack, to B, she, and to MO she to she to she, MO and to her. She to into to her to the spirit. With MO spirit to MO demon. First-rank demonic beasts weren't much smarter than ordinary beasts. They didn't know how to think and acted according to their instincts. Soon their figures appeared in the poisonous fog. Sensing the sudden provocative aura, these demonic monkeys pounced towards Mo Chinga's location without the slightest hesitation. However, before they could even get close to her, they began to run in circles. The group of monkeys formed a circle and chased each other, running in circles from head to tail. It looked interesting, but Mo Chinga didn't dare to be careless. She waved the formation flag in her hand. The formation was instantly filled with quicksand and fire. The group of monkeys squeaked. They ran left and right, but they couldn't escape no matter how hard they tried. They were burned by the fire, so they ran and trampled on each other. Mo Chinga waved the formation flag again. Many stones fell from the formation. The group of monkeys had nowhere to hide and died under the stones. Mo Chinga breathed a sigh of relief when all the demonic monkeys were killed. Aura-refining cultivators wouldn't be able to deal with so many first-rank demonic beasts if they hadn't set traps in advance. Although they were successfully killed, she still spent a lot of spiritual aura. The ability of aura-refining cultivators was too low. They couldn't use multiple spirit tools at the same time, nor could they maintain a fight of magical power for a long time. Even magic weapons without cultivation level restrictions couldn't display much of their power. The more she cultivated, the more eager she was to build her foundation. After recovering her spiritual aura, Emo Chenga stood up and cleaned up the mess. There were about 20 to 30 monkeys in the group just now. Presumably, there would be a chaotic fight in this mountain forest, so the number of demonic beasts they killed wouldn't be many. These demonic beasts were enough to exchange for a foundation-building pill. Therefore, after stuffing the corpses of the demonic monkeys into her Chenkuan bag, she sat in the formation and meditated. She didn't plan to kill any more demonic beasts. Her goal was only to obtain a foundation-building pill. She didn't want to lose her life, nor did she want to be in the limelight. While she was meditating leisurely, a monstrous wave was set off in this mountain forest. The first Wuxia sect disciple who was killed wasn't discovered, but it wasn't just one or two people who had this idea. Soon, other people also made their moves. Wuxia sect disciples were numerous and powerful. They also felt that these two groups were exterminated, so how could they be willing to give up? By the afternoon, the fight had already been brought to the surface. Although the total number of Yunwu sect and Jindao school's disciples wasn't as many as Wuxia sect's disciples, they harbored hatred in their hearts. Moreover, they usually launched sneak attacks and succeeded quite a few times. However, when Wuxia sect disciples finally reacted, both sides began to have victories and defeats. As more and more people were killed, they basically didn't care about anything else and started fighting as soon as they saw each other. Emo Chenga didn't know any of this. Fortunately, she came to this place. Otherwise, she would have probably also been involved in the fight. The sky gradually darkened, but Emo Chenga didn't do anything. She just sat in the middle of the formation. She couldn't light the lamp or it would attract other people. Even if she didn't attract other people, it wouldn't be good to fight at night if some demonic beast came. In any case, she could still see a little. She only needed to endure this night because the exit formation would be open tomorrow. Suddenly, she wrinkled her brows and raised her head. Spiritual aura fluctuations were coming from outside. Someone seemed to be coming here. After pondering for a moment, she slightly tidied up the formation she laid, leaving behind the 5 elements life and death formation. She then hid herself and carefully paid attention to that person. That person stumbled as he ran. His steps were weak and he fell from time to time, but he still managed to run all the way to this place. But all of a sudden he seemed to bump into something. With a bang, there was no sound. Even after a long time she still couldn't hear any sound. Emo Chenga pondered for a moment, then came out of her hiding place and cautiously felt her way over. She had always been cautious. Now that she had a defensive spell on her body and greenwood sword in her hand, she could deal with this person even if he suddenly launched an attack. Therefore she decided to go and take a look. Not far from her, there was a person lying motionless on the ground. The sky was too dark so she couldn't see him clearly. She could only vaguely see that he was wearing black clothes. Emo Chenga felt a bit relieved. She went over to take a look. Sure enough, it was a young Yunwu sect disciple. Senior Martial Brother, Senior Martial Brother. She gently pushed the person. After a long time the person finally reacted. He raised his head with difficulty and said in a low voice, "Junior Martial Sister, help me." Emo Chenga was dumbfounded. Junior Martial Sister? Before she could think of anything, the person's head tilted to one side and he fainted again. After thinking for a moment, she still helped the person into the formation she laid. She didn't know this person. Yunwu sect had so many aura-refining disciples, but she only knew a few of them. Even the people in the other rooms in the courtyard only looked familiar to her, so she didn't remember this person at all. However, since they were both Yunwu sect disciples and there wasn't any trouble, she could lend him a hand. She then inserted her spiritual aura into the person's body to examine his injuries. After circulating her spiritual aura through the person's meridians, Emo Chenga felt a bit relieved. The injuries on his body were very serious, but his meridians weren't damaged, so it was actually easy. After thinking for a moment, she took out medicinal pills from inside her robe and fed him a refreshing pill to prevent the poisonous fog from entering his body. She then fed him an aura-nourishing pill. A refreshing pill was only an ordinary antidote pill, it wasn't a precious medicine. As for healing medicinal pills, she did have small reversion pills on her, but they were expensive. Even foundation-building cultivators could use them. Giving them to an aura-refining cultivator she didn't know would be a bit wasteful. Besides, she didn't know this person at all, so giving him something precious was a bit too kind. Kindness had to be done appropriately to make people feel grateful and not greedy. This was the principle second uncle taught her. Not long after, the man groaned and seemed to have woken up. Emo Chenga said, "Senior Martial Brother, are you feeling better?" The person opened his eyes, struggled to sit up and forced a smile. Junior Marshal brother? Thank you. If I didn't run into you, I would have lost my life today. Mo Chinga said faintly, Senior Marshal brother, you don't have to be so polite. It was nothing. The person nodded and took out a jade bottle from inside his robe. After swallowing several medicinal pills, he handed the jade bottle to Mo Chinga. I don't dare to let Junior Marshal brother suffer any losses. Mo Chinga didn't stand on ceremony and took the bottle. This was also a rule in the cultivation world. First, no one was willing to help others and lose their belongings. Second, people who received favors from others didn't want to owe them favors. Upon seeing her taking the bottle, the person asked, Junior Marshal brother, where is this place? Is it safe? Mo Chinga said, this is the poisonous spring in the northwest. The person must have known about this place, so he immediately heaved a sigh of relief. That's good. Presumably no one will come here. After a pause, he greeted her again. Amorongzi. May I ask how I should address Junior Marshal brother? Since he said I am instead of I'm, he was obviously a well-known figure among aura refining disciples. Mo Chinga had indeed heard of this name before. Murongzi was the disciple who persisted until the end with Senior Marshal brother Zhou and the others in Miwu Valley's trial 2 years ago. At the same time, he was also Murong Yan's clan brother. Together with her, he became a disciple of the foundation building cultivator Lin Qingwan. He was the Senior Marshal brother Murong Yan mentioned who guarded the medicinal garden and provided seeds. This Senior Marshal brother was indeed quite famous among the aura refining disciples. Because she and Murong Yan could be considered friends, Mo Chinga was a bit polite. So it's Senior Marshal brother Murong. My name is Yi Xiaotian. I'm an old acquaintance of Senior Marshal sister Murong. Murongzi let out a soft, then said, so it's you. I heard Xiaoyan mention you before. He looked her up and down then revealed a smile. No wonder I thought you were a Junior Marshal sister in a daze just now. Mo Chinga originally had doubts, so she naturally asked, why is that? Murongzi pursed his lips and said with a smile, because Xiaoyan said it's a pity you're a man. Your figure and appearance are more suitable to be a woman. Mo Chinga was instantly speechless. Aside from Su Jingji, Murong Yan also liked to tease her. She said she was thin and small and had a girlish appearance, so it would be good if she was a woman and so on. When she thought of Murong Yan, she couldn't help but sigh. The Murong Yan who loved to laugh and play around had already disappeared. Murongzi noticed something was wrong with her expression and thought she didn't like people saying she had a girlish appearance, so he changed the topic. Junior Marshal brother Yi, did you meet anyone from Wuxia sect here? Mo Chinga shook her head. No. Judging from Murongzi's expression, something seemed to have happened, so she asked, did Senior Marshal brother Murong encounter something? This question made Murongzi sigh. He then said, Junior Marshal brother Yi, you've always been here, so you probably don't know the disciples of the 3 groups have already started fighting. In fact, Mo Chinga had long foreseen this, but she didn't say it out loud and just pretended she didn't know. Really? What's going on? I don't know how it started. At first it was just a private fight, but later on, it turned into a chaotic fight. We joined forces with Jindao School and were already fighting against Wuxia sect. Originally, I didn't want to get involved, but as long as I ran into people from Wuxia sect, they would take the initiative to attack me. I had no choice but to protect myself. Just now, I was killing a demonic wolf, but I was sneak attacked by someone. It wasn't easy for me to escape. Speaking up to this point, he had a worried expression on his face. It's so chaotic now. I don't know how Xiaoyan is doing. She used to always be lazy, so fights of magical power are really... Upon hearing what he said, Mo Chinga also felt a bit worried. Although Lu Yidao and Qin Shi were experienced in fights of magical power, 2 fists were no match for 4 hands. Su Jingji's cultivation level was also ordinary. Although he was a descendant of a cultivation clan and definitely had several treasures, it was hard to say if he encountered a strong enemy. Murong Yan was the most worrisome. She never liked cultivating, and the reason her cultivation level was so high was all because she ate medicinal pills. Her own abilities were really mediocre. The 2 of them looked at each other in silence for a while. Murongzi forced himself to smile. Junior Marshal brother Yi, I'll take advantage of you. Let me stay here too. My injuries really can't be healed in a short time. Mo Chinga nodded. This place isn't mine, anyone can come here. Senior Marshal brother Murong doesn't need to be polite. Murongzi smiled, then began to meditate to heal his injuries. This place was very dangerous, so it was better for him to recover his spiritual aura as soon as possible. Chapter 65. Inside the poisonous fog, Mo Tienga and Murongzi were meditating quietly. Their surroundings were quiet. This was a rare moment of peace in this mountain forest. Aside from this, battles were also going on in different places. Although this mountain forest was vast, there were always people who ran into each other. If one of the parties was Wuxia sect, it would lead to a chaotic battle. Some people killed and some people were killed. At night, for safety's sake and to vent their anger, the disciples from both sides gathered together to search for opponents who were alone and kill them to prevent themselves from being killed. Murongzi seized the time to heal his injuries and restore his spiritual aura, while Mo Tienga was secretly on guard. Unlike her fellow disciples who came from cultivation clans and harbored hatred towards Wuxia sect, she didn't want to get involved in any disputes. She just wanted to quietly wait for the exit formation to open and exchange it for a foundation-building pill. Suddenly she sensed a spiritual aura fluctuation in the air. Mo Tienga opened her eyes. Just as she was about to look at the poisonous spring behind her, she suddenly felt a gust of wind. She promptly pushed Murongzi away and rolled to the side. Her cautiousness saved 2 lives. In the next moment, the 2 of them widened their eyes and stared at the thing in front of them in astonishment. This demonic beast had a flat head, sharp teeth, and a bulging back like a small mountain. Its lower body was still in the poisonous spring, but the part that was exposed was enough for them to recognize what kind of demonic beast it was. Murongzi muttered, "Second-rank demonic beast, iron-teethed crocodile. Turns out there really is a second-rank demonic beast here." Mo Tienga pulled him back and waved her hand, summoning formation flags. The place they were originally meditating was the 5 elements life and death formation she laid. As soon as the iron-teethed crocodile attacked, it entered the formation. "Senior Martial Brother Murong, what's this?" Murongzi regained his composure and said with a frown, "This is a second-rank demonic beast, equivalent to an early-stage foundation-building cultivator. We're no match for it." Before they could say anything else, the iron-teethed crocodile dashed forward and opened its mouth to bite them. The 2 of them hastily retreated. Mo Tienga waved the formation flags, and the formation discs and flags she hid underground instantly stood up. The 5 elements life and death formation began to operate. The things around its body stood up with a "pa" sound. The iron-teethed crocodile seemed to be stunned for a moment. It blinked its small eyes, but its ability to think was not enough to understand what was happening in front of it. After pausing for a moment, it still rushed over, wanting to swallow the 2 little mosquitoes in front of it. But it failed. Vines instantly appeared beneath its feet and wrapped around its entire body, rendering it unable to move an inch. It angrily swung its tail, and the vines immediately broke. Cold sweat broke out on Mo Tienga's forehead. "This demonic beast's brute force is too strong. My formation won't be able to hold it for long." This. Murongzi's complexion also turned pale. "This bit of time isn't enough for us to run." Mo Tienga once again waved the formation flag. Water and quicksand instantly appeared inside the formation, rapidly turning it into a swamp, once again trapping the iron-teethed crocodile. At the same time he gritted his teeth and said, "Senior Brother Murong, I'll hold it back. You attack it. If we can't outrun it, we can only fight." Murongzi hesitated for a moment before answering, If we don't fight now, it'll be too late." Mo Tienga shouted, "Hurry up. I'll think of a way to hold it back so it won't attack you. You attack it as hard as you can." Infected by her attitude, Murongzi clenched his teeth and said, "All right. If worst comes to worst, we'll just fight it." 2 aura-refining cultivators definitely couldn't defeat a foundation-building cultivator, but a second-rank demonic beast without the ability to think or use magic weapons might be able to put up a fight. Murongzi immediately summoned his flying sword, used the light body technique and attacked. But in the next second, his complexion turned unsightly. His flying sword was a gift from an elder in his school. It was even infused with rare iron essence, so it was incomparably sharp. Usually, it had a lot of advantages in fights of magical power, but against this iron-teethed crocodile's thick skin, it unexpectedly didn't have the slightest effect. After the swamp couldn't hold the iron-teethed crocodile any longer, Mo Tienga once again waved her sword, causing a raging fire to appear inside the formation. At the same time, she took out a handful of bewitching flower seeds and threw them at the crocodile. Although the fire stopped the crocodile, the bewitching flower only made it wave its tail. With her current spiritual aura, the seeds she could use could only grow in a short period of time. However, second-rank demonic beasts already didn't care about these kinds of seeds. With no other choice, she took out a handful of restorative panaceas. Using a formation to trap a second-rank demonic beast consumed too much spiritual aura, so she had no choice but to consume panaceas to drag it down. On the other side, Murongzi wasn't someone with an undeserved reputation. Once he saw that his flying sword was useless, he immediately swapped it for something else, a whip that glittered with a golden light. As soon as he swung the whip, it turned into a streak of golden light, emitting a loud "pa." But after he swung it, Murongzi's complexion changed again. This whip still couldn't break the iron-teethed crocodile's thick skin. After this happened a few times, Murongzi's complexion turned ashen. Not only was he unable to break the iron-teethed crocodile's defense, but his spirit tool was also damaged by its bite. As expected of an iron-teethed crocodile, its teeth were extremely sharp. Wuxia wasn't much better off. Although she was relying on the formation, her spiritual aura was being drained too quickly by manipulating this formation to resist the second-rank demonic beast's attack. She already felt that her spiritual aura was almost exhausted, so she had no choice but to grab a handful of restorative panaceas and stuff them into her mouth. With this kind of depletion speed, she was no longer afraid of wasting medicinal pills. If she couldn't survive, no matter how many medicinal pills she had, they would be useless. Use talismans. Use talismans to attack it. Wuxia shouted at the dumbfounded Murongzi. This iron-teethed crocodile had thick skin and thick flesh. The layer of hard skin on its body was comparable to armor, so she simply couldn't pierce it. She could only use spells to penetrate that layer of skin and injure it. Upon hearing her shout, Murongzi regained his senses. He took out a handful of talismans and, without any regard for the consequences, slammed them all onto the iron-teethed crocodile's head. These talismans contained spells of various elements. Sea of fire, ice, stones, quicksand and vines, all of them smashed onto the iron-teethed crocodile's head. This time the iron-teethed crocodile finally reacted. It raised its head and stared at Murongzi, who was flying in midair with its small eyes. It then opened its mouth and sprayed a jet of water. Murongzi was greatly alarmed. He moved sideways with great difficulty to dodge, but he was careless and came in contact with some of the water. His body unexpectedly became sluggish and he fell to the ground. Taking advantage of this moment, Wuxia quickly took out the formation discs and formation flags for the disorienting formation and the spirit-trapping formation. She simply laid them down and soon after, she waved the formation flags. Vines once again appeared in the middle of the formation, firmly binding the iron-teethed crocodile. When the iron-teethed crocodile's attention returned to her side, it discovered that the spiritual aura inside its body had become slower. In a fit of rage, it couldn't care less about the other little bug and wanted to tear the bug in front of it to shreds. However, when it crawled forward, the scene in front of it changed. It actually couldn't find the existence of that little bug, so it immediately became confused. Seeing that Murongzi still hadn't crawled back up, Wuxia anxiously said, "Senior Marshal Brother Murong." As if he heard her voice, Murongzi struggled to stuff several medicinal pills into his mouth and crawled back up with great difficulty. He was already seriously injured, so it was already very difficult for him to use spirit tools and light body technique. However, he was also hit by the iron-teethed crocodile's jet of water. This was a poisonous spring, so everything in the surroundings was poisonous, let alone a demonic beast that advanced to the second rank in this place. The iron-teethed crocodile's poison was much stronger than the poisonous fog, so his injuries became even more serious. Ignoring everything else, Murongzi swallowed several healing pills to neutralize the poison and struggled to fly up. With a wave of his hand, a handful of fine flying needles flew towards the iron-teethed crocodile's eye. The iron-teethed crocodile blinked and swung its head. Some of the flying needles were flung away, while the other needles pierced the thick skin on its head. Without the slightest reaction, the needles fell down one after another. Murongzi didn't give up and continued to throw the needles. Inside the spirit-trapping formation, the iron-teethed crocodile's spiritual aura circulation became slower. In the end, the iron-teethed crocodile didn't manage to dodge the needles. With a poo sound, its eye was pierced. It instantly became furious and let out a snoring sound while facing the sky. Wuxia was delighted. She immediately stuffed another handful of restorative panaceas into her mouth, then waved the formation flag. The sea of fire inside the formation smashed down, causing the ground to shake. After being attacked by several spells, the thick skin of the iron-teethed crocodile finally showed signs of being burnt. Murongzi didn't let this opportunity slip by. He once again took out his flying sword and stabbed it towards the burnt part of the iron-teethed crocodile's skin. This time the sword stabbed solidly. It broke the iron-teethed crocodile's skin and pierced deeply into its flesh. Feeling the pain, the iron-teethed crocodile swung its tail and broke a big tree next to the spring. However, it still couldn't find where those annoying little bugs were. All it could see was the poisonous spring where it had lived for several hundred years. No matter how hard it crawled, it would always crawl back to its original spot. Blood flowed out of its eyes. Its body was in great pain from being hit by spells, and there was also something stuck in its flesh. It let out a painful grunt, but it still couldn't find those two little bugs. The only thing it could see was spells continuously smashing down on it. In the end, it couldn't hold on any longer. Another spell smashed down on it and it could no longer open its eyes. Chinga gasped for breath. Her legs went soft and she could no longer stand and knelt down. There wasn't even a trace of spiritual aura left in her body. A second-rank demonic beast was indeed much stronger than a first-rank demonic beast. She could kill those dozens of demonic monkeys without the slightest danger using the 5 elements life and death formation, but this second-rank demonic beast. She spent so much effort and ate so many medicinal pills, yet she could only trap it. If it weren't for Murongzi's help, it would have died for sure today. Murongzi lay motionless not too far from her. Just now he practically threw out all of his talismans. Once the iron-teethed crocodile died, he fell to the ground and couldn't get up. Chinga was a bit worried. She once again swallowed a restorative panacea, barely recovering some of her spiritual aura. She then stood up with difficulty and dragged her heavy legs towards Murongzi. Senior Martial Brother Murong. Senior Martial Brother Murong. Murongzi lay motionlessly on the ground. There was a blood stain on the corner of his mouth. Obviously he vomited because his injuries were too heavy. Chinga clenched her teeth, took out a small reversion pill and stuffed it into his mouth. Right now, although she wasn't injured, her spiritual aura was completely exhausted. If any danger appeared in the short term, it would be troublesome. It was better to save his life first. After all, it would always be safer if the two of them were together. After feeding him the small reversion pill, Murongzi finally slowly regained consciousness. When he saw her, there was a hint of hesitation in his eyes. Junior Martial Brother Yi, the pills you gave me? Chinga smiled bitterly. They were specially prepared for the sake of this trial. Now, I can only let Senior Martial Brother take advantage of them. She didn't dare to say she had another bottle on her. Although Senior Martial Brother Murong didn't seem like that kind of person and was Murong Yan's elder brother, they didn't have much of a friendship. Murongzi didn't doubt her. His expression changed as he earnestly said, "Thank you, Junior Martial Brother Yi. If it weren't for the medicinal pills you gave me, my injuries definitely wouldn't have lasted until tomorrow." Chinga simply waved her hand. "If Senior Martial Brother Murong doesn't want to take advantage of me, you can just return the medicinal pills to me after we leave this place. Right now, I have to treat my injuries first. Otherwise, if we run into someone again." At this point, she suddenly wrinkled her brows. Someone was coming. Chapter 66. Chinga shook her sleeves. Several things flew out and were buried in the soil. Soon after, she grabbed a few restorative spirit pills and stuffed them into her mouth. After doing these two things, the figures of a few people appeared in the poisonous fog. See. Chinga immediately tightened her grip on her greenwood sword. Murongzi, on the other hand, endured the pain and stood up. There were a total of 3 people, all of whom were 10th layer chi refining cultivators. The one in the lead was a middle-aged cultivator, a young man about 20 years old, and an old man about 50 to 60 years old. The 3 of them didn't seem easy to deal with. Since the middle-aged cultivator was the leader, he must have the highest status or the most powerful. The young man was able to reach the 10th layer of the aura refining realm at such a young age, so he must also have some skills. As for the old man, there was no need to talk about him. He had a lot of experience, so he must be the most cunning. When he and Murongzi glanced at each other, both of them smiled bitterly. He had just experienced a bitter battle, and he had actually encountered such a combination. The 3 men stood not far away, cautiously sizing them up. Both Chinga and Murongzi secretly pretended to be indifferent and tightened their grip on their flying swords. After a while, the young man couldn't help but ask, "Senior brothers, what are we waiting for?" The old man frowned and slowly said, "Be careful." They all saw the corpse of the iron-teethed crocodile on the ground. Although it was already dead, there was still a huge pressure remaining. It was obvious that it wasn't a Tier 1 demonic beast, which caused them to hesitate. For two people to be able to kill a second-ranked demonic beast, it was obvious that these two people definitely had extraordinary skills. However, they themselves were not to be trifled with, so they were unwilling to let it go just like that. It must be known that the corpse of a second-ranked demonic beast could definitely be exchanged for a foundation-building pill. Caution, consideration, fanaticism, these expressions appeared on the faces of the three of them in turn. He was worried that his opponent would be too strong and lose him, but at the same time he was unwilling to let go of such a great benefit. The corpse of a second-ranked demonic beast could not only be made into a spirit tool, but it could also be made into a magic tool for foundation establishment cultivators. This was another huge fortune. The young man couldn't restrain himself and shouted, "Senior brothers, what are you hesitating for? Are we going to let them off for nothing?" The old man said, "These two aren't easy to deal with. Don't be rash." Finally, the two of them looked at the middle-aged cultivator between them. For a time, the middle-aged cultivator was also hesitant. He had no confidence in killing them and he was unwilling to let them go. However, the two of them were looking at them with indifferent expressions, as if they didn't care about their decision at all. In fact, Mo Chenga and Murongzi weren't relaxed at all. Although Murongzi had taken a small reversion pill, healing his injuries wasn't something that could be done in a short period of time. Fighting while he was seriously injured repeatedly had already caused serious damage to his meridians. Right now, his expression remained unchanged purely because of his unswerving determination. Mo Chenga was the same. She was fully aware that they had just gone through a bitter battle and both of them were exhausted, so how could she not be nervous? However, she was no longer a child who hadn't seen the world. She had traveled extensively with second uncle and experienced many fights of magical powers in the past few years, so she knew she couldn't show weakness at this time. The middle-aged cultivator struggled for a long time before reluctantly saying, "Let's go somewhere else to take a look." The three of them turned around to leave. Mo Chenga and Murongzi secretly heaved sighs of relief. They really didn't have the confidence to fight them. Unexpectedly, the three of them suddenly stopped. The middle-aged cultivator sneered. "We were almost fooled by them. After killing a second-ranked demonic beast, even if they weren't injured, how much spiritual aura would they have left?" Right after he said that, the three of them turned around and immediately split into three directions to flank them. Mo Chenga immediately slapped a defensive talisman on her body and released her greenwood sword. Murongzi's reaction wasn't slow either. Although he didn't have any talismans, he still had his spirit tool. The flying sword mixed with iron essence was extremely fast and flew out in a flash. The two of them struck first and gained the upper hand, catching their opponents off guard. The young man looked at the two flying swords flying towards him and momentarily panicked. These two swords were very fast, so they obviously weren't ordinary weapons. He had no choice but to dodge in a hurry. Mo Chenga stealthily shifted her position and threw out a large number of firethorn seeds, temporarily trapping the young man. Just as she was about to tell Murongzi to deal with the old man together, she heard a muffled groan. She turned around and saw Murongzi clutching his chest while spitting out a mouthful of blood. The flying sword he was controlling was also swaying in the air. Mo Chenga was shocked. Senior Marshal Brother Murong. The three of them were overjoyed. The young man was trapped and couldn't escape for the time being. The middle-aged cultivator and the old man glanced at each other, then simultaneously attacked. The middle-aged cultivator took out the most common spirit tool in the cultivation world, the flying sword, while the old man threw out a mirror. Mo Chenga hastily recalled her greenwood sword, but it only managed to block the mirror. The flying sword rapidly stabbed towards Murongzi, but Murongzi barely managed to dodge it. The flying sword brushed past his shoulder, causing blood to blossom. How could the middle-aged cultivator let go of this opportunity? He quickly flew towards Murongzi, caught the flying sword and stabbed it towards him. Mo Chenga wanted to help, but the old man's mirror was really powerful. After being blocked by her, it flew back to the old man's hand. He immediately flipped the mirror over and a golden light shone towards her. Although she had a defensive barrier on her body, she didn't dare to block it, so she could only take back her greenwood sword to block the golden light. Right at that moment, the middle-aged cultivator had already closed in on Murongzi. Seeing that Murongzi didn't have any strength to fight back, the middle-aged cultivator revealed an evil grin and stabbed the flying sword in his hand. Pooh! The flying sword pierced deep into Murongzi's body. Blood flowed down the blade of the sword, but at the same time the middle-aged cultivator let out a loud, "Ah!" and let go of the sword to cover his abdomen. A flying sword pierced through his abdomen on his back. It was Murongzi's incomparably sharp flying sword mixed with iron essence. Mo Chenga's expression changed greatly, but she heard the other party shout, "Senior Marshal Brother Zhang." Murongzi and the middle-aged cultivator perished together, but the other party didn't look angry. Instead they panicked. In just a short moment one of them was trapped and the other was killed. The old man made a prompt decision. He put away the mirror in his hand, then immediately fled into the distance. Perhaps the reason he could survive until now was because he was timid. Mo Chenga didn't chase after him. Instead, she swung her flying sword, ending the middle-aged cultivator's life, then turned towards the remaining young man. Once the young man saw the old man fleeing, his expression immediately became very unsightly. He swung the large knife in his hand, chopping the fire brambles in half and attacking Mo Chenga. Mo Chenga had never met an opponent who used spirit tools to attack like a secular martial artist, so she couldn't react in time. Fortunately, she had defensive talismans on her, so she retreated while parrying with her greenwood sword. She wanted to counterattack, but she didn't have much spiritual aura left, so she could only retreat slowly. Seeing that she didn't dare to take his attack, the other party had a complacent expression on his face as he approached step by step. Mo Chenga suddenly smiled. A formation flag appeared in her hand and she waved it lightly. All of a sudden, with a "pa" sound, the formation flags and formation discs that were hidden suddenly stood up. The young man turned pale with fright, but he was already bewildered by the scene in front of him. Yellow sand filled the sky. It was like a desert in the far west. Apart from that, there was nothing else. This was a formation she hastily laid just now. Originally, she wasn't sure if she could use it. Fortunately, this young man was an impulsive person, so she lured him into the formation step by step. Now that he was in her formation, he was naturally at her mercy. She waved the formation flag again and the scene changed again. Spells of the 5 elements flew towards the young man in an endless stream. The young man brandished his knife to block them, but he discovered that these spells disappeared upon contact. They were simply illusions. He was so angry that he cursed loudly. Mo Chenga once again swallowed a restorative panacea, then grabbed a talisman. She controlled her greenwood sword and attacked the young man in the formation together. The young man thought it was an illusion again, so he didn't block them. He was immediately hit solidly and couldn't be more dead. Mo Chenga heaved a sigh of relief and withdrew her greenwood sword. When she thought of Murongzi, she hastily ran back. Senior Marshal Brother Murong. She once again helped Murongzi up from the ground. Mo Chenga discovered that his breath was already very weak. He was already seriously injured. The two of them encountered the iron-teethed crocodile, and after a thrilling battle they finally killed it. Then they encountered these 3 enemies. His abdomen was pierced through. He basically relied on his last breath to kill that middle-aged cultivator, but in the end he couldn't hold on any longer and collapsed. Right now his spiritual aura was exhausted, his meridians were damaged, and his dantian was also pierced through. He simply couldn't be saved. Murongzi slowly opened his eyes and said with difficulty, "Junior? Marshal Brother Yi." Mo Chenga nodded. "I'm here." Murongzi spat out a mouthful of blood. Mo Chenga hastily supported him. She pressed her palm against his and channeled spiritual aura into his body. This made Murongzi feel a bit better. He showed a faint smile and said in a weak voice, "I know. I can't hold on anymore. Please, do me a favor." Mo Chenga promptly nodded. "Senior Marshal Brother Murong, please speak." Murongzi pulled out his Chenkuan bag with difficulty and gasped for breath. "In our clan, the one with the most hope is Xiaoyan. Please, give the demonic beast and the flying sword I killed to her." He closed his eyes and said, "As for the rest, I'll give it to Junior Marshal Brother as a souvenir." As he spoke, blood kept flowing out of his mouth and he firmly held onto Mo Chenga's sleeves. Upon hearing his last words, Mo Chenga sighed inwardly. "Rest assured, Senior Marshal Brother. I'll bring the things there." Murongzi smiled, but his eyes were filled with unwillingness and sorrow. He finally loosened his grip, his head tilted and he breathed no more. Mo Chenga was stunned for a long time before she regained her composure. Although she didn't have any friendship with Murongzi, she still felt sad. This was the omnipresent death of cultivators. Not long ago, although Senior Marshal Brother Murong was seriously injured, he was still talking cheerfully and full of confidence. But in the blink of an eye he became a corpse. She wiped her face, erased the sadness, then stood up to clean up the scene. In any case, she had to continue living. Building her foundation, forming her gold core, forming her nascent soul, she had to live happily. First, she removed the Chenkuan bags and weapons from the 3 corpses, then burned the corpses clean. She only put Murongzi's ashes in a jade box. Soon after, she cleaned the bloodstains on her body and sorted the things in the 3 Chenkuan bags. She used up a lot of her own medicinal pills and talismans, but fortunately the 2 Wuxia sect disciples still had some. All 3 of them had the corpses of demonic beasts on their bodies, but the other 2 only had 3 to 5, while Murongzi had more than 10. After pondering for a moment, she took out a Chenkuan bag and put all the demonic beasts the 3 of them hunted into it. She then put all the spirit tools on Murongzi's body into the Chenkuan bag. After all, she had gone through thick and thin with Murongzi and was acquainted with Murongyen. These spirit tools were useless to her, so she might as well return them to Murongyen, that is, if Murongyen was still alive. Soon after, she went to deal with the iron-teeth crocodile's corpse. This iron-teeth crocodile's carcass was a valuable material for refining tools. While she was cleaning up, she found the flying needles Murongzi left behind. These flying needles were sparkling and transparent, almost traceless. They were indeed good for sneak attacks. She then put all of them into her Chenkuan bag. After she finished sorting everything and replenished her spiritual aura inside the formation, Mo Chenga decided to leave the poisonous spring. That old man from Wuxia sect had escaped, so who knew if there would be anyone else coming? It would be better for her to find another place to hide. Mo Chenga couldn't help but sigh when she turned around to look at the poisonous spring. Not long ago they were talking cheerfully and wittily, but now they were already a pile of ashes. Chapter 67. She entered the valley at 7 a.m. yesterday, so it was now 1:15 a.m. Mo Chenga calculated that she still needed 6 hours to leave the valley. A lot of things could happen in 6 hours and a lot of people could die. She needed to be more cautious. The exit formation would be opened in the center, and the more central the area was, the more dangerous it would be. Mo Chenga thought for a long time before she decided to wander around the periphery. Once the formation opened, she would go to the center. Moreover, she had to use her divine sense at all times. Not only did she have to avoid people, but she also had to avoid demonic beasts. This was somewhat difficult, but it was still safer than staying in the poisonous spring. Who knew whether that old man from Wuxia sect would call his fellow disciples or not? After all, the corpse of a second-rank demonic beast was very attractive to aura-refining cultivators like them. In the east of this forest there was a 300 feet tall waterfall. In the southwest there was a high mountain. In the north there was the cliff they came down from, and in the northwest, near the cliff, was the poisonous spring. The only way to leave this forest was to the northwest of the poisonous spring. However, the poisonous spring was an extremely dangerous existence. Not only were there demonic beasts that lived in groups, but there was also a poisonous fog that filled the air. There were also unknown dangers in the deep water, so no one would think of leaving from there. Therefore, nearly 1,000 aura-refining cultivators were in this forest. Even though this forest was very large and it wasn't easy to meet friends, it wasn't difficult to meet people. An hour after leaving the poisonous spring, Mo Chenga had already met several groups of people. What Murongzi said was true. The 3 groups had already formed teams to guard against danger and to kill enemies. In order to avoid these people, she spent a lot of effort. Her breath-concealing technique was only passed down from Yi Clan's records, so it couldn't be considered brilliant. However, because the spirit-concealing jade pendant not only concealed her physique but also had spiritual aura-gathering and purifying effects, the effects of her spells were somewhat enhanced. Because she knew her limits, she was even more cautious. Whenever she sensed someone from afar, she would immediately avoid them. Along the way, she could clearly see the fierceness of the battle. More than once, Mo Chenga saw traces of fights of magical powers, charred trees, cracked ground, and congealed bloodstains. Every dark red puddle on the ground perhaps represented the end of a life. Sometimes they would come across corpses that had not been disposed of. Some of them were dressed in purple, some in yellow, and some in green. The frozen expressions on their faces were all hatred and fear. Occasionally she would see familiar faces. They were fellow disciples or sisters she had met in the sect. Fortunately, there weren't any fellow disciples that she could call friends with. Later she gradually became numb to it. No matter what kind of marks she encountered, she could turn a blind eye to them. Nevertheless, despite being so careful, she was still discovered by the 2 Wuxia sect disciples. With the greenwood sword guarding her side and several talismans in her other hand, Mo Chenga discreetly observed her surroundings. Among the 2 people besieging her, One was a robust man whose physique wasn't inferior to Louis Dao's, and the other was a beautiful young married woman. The young woman was in the 10th layer of the aura refining realm, and the burly man was in the 9th layer of the aura refining realm. Moreover, both of them seemed to be very experienced in fights of magical powers. One in front of the other in the back, they blocked her way. The surrounding trees were very dense, and the two directions that the two of them were blocking were the easiest points to break through. Emo Chinga couldn't help but frown. It seemed escaping was impossible, so she could only kill them. However, these two people had silently surrounded her, so they might not be easy to deal with. She had to think of a way to deal with them. After sizing her up, the robust man uttered an "eh," and said, "Wife, this brat seems to be the one old man Chin mentioned." Old man Chin? Emo Chinga pondered for a moment. Could he be the old man from Wuxia sect who ran away from the poisonous spring? However, she didn't expect the two people in front of her to be husband and wife. This young married woman's cultivation level was high and she was beautiful, but she actually chose such a crude man whose cultivation level wasn't obvious as her Dao companion? Emo Chinga couldn't help but glance at the young married woman. The young married woman saw her face and said with a smile, "Husband, it's not like you don't know that old man Chin has always been timid. However, this little brother is quite handsome. What a pity." Upon hearing the young married woman praising another man's handsomeness, the robust man grunted with dissatisfaction. Wife. The young married woman seemed to be very proud of her husband's jealousy. She covered her mouth and laughed for a while before saying, "Husband, what are you afraid of? No matter how handsome he is, won't he still die in our hands?" The robust man felt her words were reasonable. He chuckled and said, "Wife, you're right." He then turned towards Emo Chinga and glared at her. "Brat, hand over your life." Right after he finished speaking, Emo Chinga had already made her move. Her greenwood sword swiftly shot forward, but it was a feint. The raging flame talisman in her hand, which was hidden under the light of greenwood sword, flew out of her hand. The robust man was about to attack, but his initiative was seized. He immediately became furious and brandished the spirit tool in his hand, aiming to hit greenwood sword. His spirit tool was a huge iron wheel, which seemed to fit his body shape perfectly. He was quite confident in using his spirit tool to fight against Emo Chinga. Unfortunately, Emo Chinga's real killing move wasn't on her spirit tool. Greenwood sword retreated after being hit. After the iron wheel repelled greenwood sword, it still fiercely rushed towards Emo Chinga. At the same time, the young married woman behind her also opened an umbrella and threw it at her. Emo Chinga didn't panic. The raging flame talisman had already arrived. With a loud bang, the robust man let out a blood-curdling scream. Just as the iron wheel and the umbrella were about to reach her, Emo Chinga's figure suddenly disappeared into thin air. In the next moment, Emo Chinga appeared in front of the robust man. She thrust the greenwood sword in her hand, ruthlessly stabbing the robust man's chest. The robust man let out a shrill scream before he suddenly fell to the ground, no longer breathing. "Husband," the young married woman screamed and rushed over. Emo Chinga used light body technique to jump and avoid the umbrella. She was able to successfully launch a sneak attack this time because her cultivation level was one layer higher than the robust man's, but the robust man still underestimated her. Pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger was indeed the most useful trick in the cultivation world. This young married woman seemed to have deep feelings for her husband. When she realized her husband was no longer breathing, she angrily rushed towards Emo Chinga, wishing she could tear Emo Chinga's body into 10,000 pieces. Nevertheless, Emo Chinga didn't plan to fight her head-on. Her enemy had obviously lost her mind, so she didn't want to die together with her. Talismans and spirit tools were continuously thrown at her. Emo Chinga only dodged them by relying on light body technique. It wasn't until the other party was obviously so angry that she couldn't control herself that Emo Chinga threw the greenwood sword, talismans, and a handful of seeds at her. Seeing that Emo Chinga was using the same method to deal with her, the young married woman was furious. She patted a defensive talisman on her body and used the umbrella to block Emo Chinga's attack. Her other hand grasped a handful of talismans and was about to throw them at Emo Chinga. But she didn't have the chance. Before she could throw the talismans, she felt pain in her body. The hand holding the umbrella powerlessly slipped and she fell to the ground. After confirming that the two people were dead, Emo Chinga collected their things and dealt with their corpses. She didn't stay for even a moment and ran away. This fight of magical power seemed to go very smoothly. In just a moment she finished dealing with the two people, but in fact her losses weren't small. In order to deal damage to that burly man, She had used up 5 or 6 flame talismans, which was equivalent to dozens of spirit stones. Moreover, she had also used a priceless invisibility talisman, which second uncle had spent a lot of money to buy. She killed the young married woman while she was panicking. It seemed like she used the same method she used to attack the burly man, but in fact she mixed the talismans with the sparkling and translucent flying needles left by Murongzi. That was why she was able to silently break through the young married woman's umbrella and defensive barrier. Although she had a lot of experience in fights of magical power, this was the best time she had ever achieved her predetermined goal. She made a decision in a split second and immediately attacked without making any mistakes. In the blink of an eye she gained the upper hand. Mo Chinga carefully reviewed this fight in her mind. She was in a calm and focused state, grasping all the details in her hands, making the most correct decision in a split second and hitting the target with one strike. She wanted to remember this feeling. This was the best state for fights of magical power. Someone else was in front of her. Mo Chinga turned around, but she didn't run far before she sensed several people's breaths not too far from her. She had no choice but to restrain her breath, find a tree, jump on it, and hide herself. The first group to pass by was a mixed group of people from Jindao School and Yunwu sect. Mo Chinga didn't plan to go out and greet them. With so many people together, it would be very easy for them to be discovered, and it would also be easy for them to fight. Although it would be safer with more people, more disputes meant more chances of death. These people passed by very quickly. Mo Chinga pondered for a moment and decided not to come down. Instead, she continued to sit on the top of the tree with her breath restrained and took out the Chenkuan bag she obtained just now. The seeds in her hands were already used up, but there were still a lot of talismans and medicinal pills in the Chenkuan bags of these Wuxia sect disciples. There were also several good spirit tools. However, for aura refining disciples, spirit tools that hadn't been refined by themselves weren't easy to use and could only be used as backups. In addition, the flying needles left by Murongzi were quite useful. Controlling these flying needles required divine sense rather than spiritual aura, so aura refining cultivators couldn't use 2 spirit tools at the same time. If these flying needles were used well, very few aura refining disciples would be able to defend against them. After putting away the things that were useful for fighting, Mo Chinga jumped down from the tree and continued to move forward. She hadn't gone far when she was startled. There were a lot of corpses on the ground. There were disciples from all 3 cultivation groups. When she saw the faces of those dead Yunwu sect disciples, she realized that they were the ones who just passed by. As it turned out, they actually ran into another group of Wuxia sect disciples and perished together. Mo Chinga shook her head and collected these people's Chenkuan bags. She then set a fire and burned all the corpses. On her way here, at least 50 to 60 people had died, and there were still many places she hadn't been to. She was afraid that after 4 hours, less than half of the people would be able to leave this place alive. Thinking up to this point, she couldn't help but sneer. Wuxia sect probably didn't expect this, right? Merging Yunwu sect and Jindao School resulted in the loss of countless high-level aura refining disciples. Among these people, they were the group of aura refining disciples with the highest hopes of building their foundation. As a result, the number of foundation building cultivators in the next 100 years would be greatly reduced. They wouldn't be able to become the 8th cultivation group. On the contrary, their strength would be much weaker. Therefore, she wasn't the least bit afraid of being punished for killing people. Because at that time, they would discover that they couldn't afford to lose aura refining disciples. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.